Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
I did want to let y'all know, if you have been following me and enjoying some of the bit information that we have got, we have a new online course that's being released. It has only been available up till now in a masterclass version that is like 30 hours long. We are now going to release the original 6 modules of that course, which does include the bit video, but a lot of add-ons as well as a 70-page study guide that goes along with the course. We have also included in this self-guided course 2 of the videos from the master class where we had some special guests coming in. So that's something like an extra 4 to 5 hours worth of content for you to watch that I think adds a lot of value to the course and gives you an idea of what the master class would be like if you decided to upgrade to it at a later time. You also, because you've already bought the self-guided part of the course, you won't have to pay full freight for the master class version if you decide to go to it later. If you're interested in checking that out, head over to thebitcourse.com. We will have a link in the show notes to the specific page with the self-guided course if you're interested in more information. At the very least, I would encourage you to get on our subscriber list for the newsletter. I do send out pretty regular emails with some tips and things, and that's not stuff I share on social media. That's all exclusive to this particular newsletter. So anyway, check it out. I think it's well worth your time and money, and it does cover way more than just the dry bit mechanics and stuff you may think it has. It's got a whole lot in there about how to use your hands, how to apply this bit in practical terms versus that bit, kind of the differences between them, the things this is going to help you with versus that. So it isn't just mechanical kind of stuff. It's a lot of very practical information as well. Our guest today is Miss Gretchen Deane. She began her career in the equine world as a professional rider in the show jumping scene. She has worked with several winning Olympians and international clinicians. She started into bodywork stuff in the Masterson Method. She's a certified practitioner of the integrated equine performance bodywork. She is also completed certification and continuing education with Spencer LaFleur's School of Neuromuscular Horse Dentistry. That is a mouthful, let me say. I'm proud of myself for getting through that one without stuttering. She is also done Reiki training and attunements through the John Harvey Gray Center for Reiki Healing. She is very adept at perceiving subtle aspects of physical condition and communication with horses. It was my privilege to meet her at one of the Masterson Method gatherings, and I will say that Gretchen is kind of an old soul and one of those people, if you meet her and you don't like her, that says a lot more about you than it does about Gretchen. Everybody that actually knows Gretchen will judge the hell out of you if you didn't like her. I assure you about that. So Gretchen, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm tickled to get to have this conversation with you. You're the second equine dentist that we have had on here, but I have a feeling you're going to have a pretty cool take on all of this stuff. And this is definitely one of those aspects of the horse industry that we need more learning on, and kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, I would say. I don't know if you agree or not, but
I do agree. Yeah, after having been a rider and training horses for several years, I never knew anything about teeth. So, I think it gets missed over a lot, and it's not something that's in front of us that we see every day. So
well, we start everyone off as always with our icebreaker questions. So these are for points and prizes, so you absolutely want to be on your A game here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. If you were a Jedi, what percent chance is there that you would misuse the force?
I would say 0%. I don't really know how I could go wrong. I think in some ways I probably already am a Jedi.
I like it. That's extreme confidence right there. I mean, that's impressive. Morning or evening?
I'm gonna have to say evening. I've never really been a huge morning person, although I would, if I could get my circadian rhythms correct, I think I would go to bed at like 10 and get up at like 7. So that would be a solid 9 hours every night.
Sounds
I
good.
probably
I've
wouldn't
never,
be able to get as much done if I did that.
or maybe more, right? Rest is important. I've never understood what those little bugs that put their shells on the trees have to do with sleep cycles, but I guess it must be true. Who knows?
Right? What?
How long do you dunk a cookie in milk?
Oh, I don't really eat cookies anymore very often at all, but if I was gonna do it, I'd not want it to fall apart. So just probably a couple seconds depending on the cookie.
So a little more on the crunchy side than the soggy side.
Yeah.
If you came across someone playing bagpipes, would you hit them with a shoe or a boot or just a closed fist?
I don't like maybe an open palm, but I no, I don't think it would depend on the quality of their playing. I don't think I would strike out at them like that.
Are you typically easily auditorily annoyed?
Oh, not by bagpipes.
Anything else? I mean,
I'm sensitive to like when I'm working, if I'm like sometimes it's just amazing, like people will ask you like really in-depth like personal questions when I'm like adjusting a tooth all the way in the back of the mouth for like a little space that's as big as my pinky fingernail and with an animal that's, weighs like 10 times as much as I do.
mhm.
So I always, stuff like that. Yeah, if there's like an auditory like stimulus coming in and I'm like, wow, this is not like what I'm focused on right now, then it can be kind of hard. Yeah. But in general, I do like a good bit of quiet as well. But I love music and I like listening to podcasts and things when I'm driving. So,
One of the probably most common things that I talk to my sons about is don't be a distraction. Like if you walk upon someone who's obviously focusing on something, like just stand there and wait. Don't think that it's okay to just wah, 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 open up and start talking to them. Like there's some things that
yeah.
could be life and death. You do not need to distract this person right now, right?
Right. Like if it's like a person on a roof or a ladder or something. Yeah. Like some things you just want to be careful of.
So this will be a really interesting for you question for you, I think. What skill or technique do you not have with a horse that you admire in someone else and wish you did have?
So I always kind of had this like fantasy about colt starting. And I did a little bit of colt starting when I must have been like about from when I was like 25 to like 28. I worked with a lot of young horses and horses that hadn't been ridden yet. And I always was really into like working with young horses and green horses for riding too. But I feel like I was just like a little bit kind of late to the game and like some people that are really good at working with babies have been doing it like through generations and um I think it would be a little different if I came back to it now because I have more skills and I'm more refined in my communication with horses, and I wouldn't feel maybe so rushed because some of the jobs I had felt like the pressure was uncomfortable for the horse and like for me, for young horses. But that's something I would love to keep learning more about and get better at. I think it'd be a really cool thing.
Well, I can certainly understand that. What would you say is the most important quality for a horseman or horsewoman to have? Just a real easy little question there. No.
Yeah. I'm gonna maybe say awareness because I feel like you could have other qualities like patience came into my mind as well. I think that's important, but like if you don't have awareness, you maybe wouldn't even realize if you're feeling impatient or if you start to get frustrated. And I think it's really, it's really difficult to have awareness for what's going on in the horse if we don't have self-awareness first. So I think that's pretty important just for getting around horses and being safe even.
I completely agree. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
Oh, I'm like 4.
Oh, okay.
Maybe like a 6. So like I hauled my single beautiful quarter horse who is excellent at loading and traveling. And I drove like about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, and then I had to back down my friend's driveway. This is just like a month ago, and I hadn't backed a trailer in a horse trailer and like a bumper trailer in a really, really long time. Um, and I did well, like I did fine, but I was really glad that there was no one there watching me. So maybe like a 6 or 7 on a good day, but I'm not professional at that at all.
That's fair enough. I applaud your honesty. I think so far everybody's rated themselves an 8 or above. So,
Well, you're gonna have to start like checking them out and see like, are these people really, are they gonna hold true?
I've pitched some ideas of actual competitions. Like if we're going to have a Saturday, Sunday horse show, we need a Friday night backing contest or something like that, right? I mean, just a little
Yeah,
extra money on the side or something. I put it up. Yeah,
anyone can say that they're a 9.
that's right. Do you have a physical fitness stretching protocol, yoga, or anything like that that you do?
I have been doing yoga since I was about 15 years old, and I I do stretch every day pretty much. Like when I'm working, if I'm on like longer trips, I try to stretch every day. Even if it's just like 5 or 10 minutes. And then I don't like work out a lot. I like to walk a lot. I go out in the woods. I like hiking. So yeah, try to keep some core exercises in there and stuff, but um I really, try to be centered and aware when I'm working, and that helps the most because if I get really focused and kind of out of my body, then at the end of the day, and then I have to drive also, things get kind of out pretty quickly, you know. I have to
Yeah.
just keep I just have to keep like being aware and then letting go of tension like the whole time and breathing. Breathing is really important.
Kind of is. Yeah. It's amazing how many people ride and hold their breath at the same time. That's a big,
Yeah.
yeah, big deal.
Yeah.
Bay or sorrel?
My horse is a Bayroan, and I have had a sorrel horse before, but I really like bays.
You are not alone. I say this on all the podcasts, but I thought that was going to be a 50-50 down the middle kind of question. It's not even close. It's like 90% of people pick bay horses on
Yeah,
that.
so is that
It's
like, are we like ra or a little bit racist or like what's
I
going on there? Like that's
I don't know. I'll say this. So I usually have a decent sized herd of horses around here, 20 to 30 head or something like that. And I keep most of them in the pasture where we're at now. We got 45 acres of pasture. And commonly there are sub herds within the herd. And like if I have 3 or 4 paint horses, they will typically be in their own group. There'll be a sub
yeah.
herd almost every time over here. And so they do seem to actually group themselves that way a little bit, which I've always found pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've heard other people say that as well. And even where my horse was for the last couple years, like there were two white horses and they were together, and then there were two bay mares and they were together. But
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting. I wonder
It
what that's
is.
about.
When you meet a set of twins, do you ever have the urge to tell them that at least one of them was unplanned?
No, I have never had that urge before, and I've never even heard anyone like ask that before. So I do think it's pretty funny. Like I have twins in my family actually. I have two different sets of cousins that are twins on my mom's side. So I don't think I'm gonna ask them that when I see them next.
You're going to think it though. The seed has been planted now.
Well, it already was clear, like I didn't have to ask because I know that they weren't like planning to have twins. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, I'll try to keep my mind clear, might not come up.
Dogs or cats?
I like dogs. My dog is really small, so she's like kind of like a cat, and she likes cats also. And I would love to have a cat as well, like a cat friend for my dog. Um, but I can't really because they can't travel. They wouldn't go well on the road. We had a cat out, like I was in Iowa, a couple of weeks ago, and this cat like came into the yard where we were staying, and it was up in a tree like 30 feet, and it was like meowing incessantly at me. So I like tried to get it down. I put a table under the tree, and eventually it jumped down. And then I fed it a little bit, and I gave it some salmon, and it
Mm.
would not leave after that. Like every time we would go outside, the cat was there, and it was like really not shy at all, and it's like meowing, and then it climbed up the side of the house one night, like, and was like on the screen like looking in and meowing at us, and like it was out of control. So I think it wanted to come with us, but I did not adopt that cat.
Fair enough. Some of them do travel. I've even seen 18 wheelers on the road that had a cat like walking on the dashboard back, like that was his travel companion was a cat. I'm thinking the smell of cat pee in that truck was probably more than I could handle, but who
I've
knows?
had them like one time I was working at a barn, and a cat went onto the hood of my car when I was backing out, and so I kind of like backed up quick and then like hit the brakes. So it like ran up onto the hood, and I thought for sure it was gone. And I got like a mile and a half down the road, and I got to a stop sign, and I could hear it meowing on the roof. And it's like I was going like 25 or 30 miles an hour, and it had stayed on the roof. So I like went out, I got it and threw it back in the car, and then I drove it back to the barn and kicked it out, and it just like went back down to the barn. But I think they do kind of like Shanghai themselves sometimes like that.
Yeah.
And uh I people get them harnesses and stuff. Like I don't know how that all works. but I just stick with the single dog for now, and that's enough for me.
So what kind of dog is your favorite dog? Is it necessarily travel size, fun size like that, or do you've always wanted a border
Yeah.
collie, or what's your deal there?
No, so we always had big dogs when I was growing up, and my I'd say that my mother was probably like a little bit almost like kind of like judgmental against like small dogs. Like they weren't like kind of like real dogs, you know? And we had like Labradors and we had a retriever one time for a while. Um, but now the dog that I had that like magically manifested is about 7.5 pounds, and she's a Chihuahua mixed with a Mountain Terrier. And she's so cool. And she goes everywhere with me. She can go on the plane and go like under the seat, but she's a little bit hardier than a Chihuahua. And but the Chihuahua is actually I didn't know this before, but they're like really good companion dogs. So for like a one person dog that, wants to be with you all the time, and for like a truck dog that, because she's in the truck all day sometimes, and she's super professional.
So she's actually socialized, I take it. She's not out trying to bite everybody that you come across or anything.
No, and I think that like people, okay, like we were at I was working with this vet, and she does a lot of chiropractic and acupuncture for dogs. So she did a chiropractic session for Minnie, for my dog, and Minnie's like about a year old, so she's small, and she's still pretty young. And before the session, the vet said to me, like, I have some bites. The bites on my hand are from like poodles and chihuahuas. Okay. And I was like, well, I said, Minnie has never offered to bite anyone ever. And I think that that's because I've never put her in that type of situation where there was that much pressure on her that she felt like she had to defend herself like that. And I think that that's true because she's so little. Like, if you go to grab her, if she had to get serious, she would, but she's mostly just kind of timid. But I think a lot of people treat small dogs, even when they're like doing their nails and stuff, they treat them like they can just do whatever they want because they're little.
Hmm.
And you could, but it's like, with working with horses, you realize, if you get like some people, like they might get smaller and smaller horses until they have like a mini, and then it's fine, but it's like the mini actually isn't fine.
Yeah, if he was bigger, you'd have problems here. Huh?
Yeah, and you have problems with minis too, like
Oh, by the way, Chihuahua far and away highest bite rate of any breed of dog. People worry about pit bulls. If you ask a veterinarian what breed of dog comes in and bites your vet techs the most, it's Chihuahua first, second, and third place.
But
So,
people like, okay, but people like hold them and stuff. So they like I noticed because she's so protective of me and of us that, but especially of me, that like initially, if she start to get a little defensive or something, I would just put her down because people like go around holding them, and then, they're trying to protect their person, and then someone comes into your space, but you're not even letting them like leave if they need to or something.
yep.
So I don't know, it's just never really come up for us, but I did start to understand a little bit, I feel like, because I didn't really know what small dogs were about. And so there were a lot of things that kind of just intuitively I did early on that I could imagine would possibly create a lot of different behavioral issues if you weren't kind of aware of what was happening.
Yeah, makes sense.
So don't hate on Chihuahuas, Daniel.
I don't. So, well, I have another theory there, which I think plays out. I've actually had a long conversation with a vet friend of mine on this. We got onto this topic, and she went to researching um, hydrocephalus, so water on the brain. And with Chihuahuas, they've bred these apple-headed Chihuahuas and all, and that's actually what that is. They bred a dog with water on the brain, and so
That's
yeah,
just unfortunate.
it's pretty immoral if you think about it. And so I think a lot of the behavioral issues that we see with those dogs, I totally agree with you on the way that they're handled. They're generally not socialized and all of that stuff properly, and then people don't give them the respect that they should, because it's a 3-pound dog and what could it do even if and all. But I think also the hydrocephalus issue, they're not really known for trainability and all of that. Is that the fault of the Chihuahua, or is that the fault of people that bred specific Chihuahuas that now have a genetic propensity to, not actually be trainable? So I think that's kind of a double-edged sword on that one. I've
Yeah,
always liked them.
I feel like either way, the responsibility is in the human
I
court.
agree. Yeah. We do a lot of things in the course of breeding and that kind of stuff that we probably shouldn't. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. Well, and plus she has rat terrier too. She's not just Chihuahua, so.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So she's double bred to bite people. Oh. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Yes. I would have it with pepperoni and some jalapenos. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Sounds good. What about a little olive too? A little salty and sweet kind of common? No, not an olive person.
Maybe.
Are you a cook?
I do. I like cooking a lot. I'm a creative cooker. I don't actually make a lot of pizzas. I like in the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 years, I have really drastically cut back on the amount of like flour or wheat like that's produced in the United States that I consume. So pizza wouldn't be like one of my go-to things, but I do like to cook a lot. Yeah.
So the salmon that you fed to the cat you were trying to kidnap there, was that salmon you had cooked?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I cook for my little dog too.
Okay. That's cool. I like the way you said that. My little dog too. A little Wizard of Oz reference, I think. A little something in there. And your little dog too. Would you share with us your horse industry related pet peeve? Could be more than one too. So I know sometimes it's hard to pick one.
Yeah, so like, okay, and I feel like I'm trying to gradually learn and expand on my awareness and acceptance. So I don't tend to get like hung up on little things that bother me. I try not to really get bothered by, people can be however they are, and that is okay. And I would, it's sensitive sometimes working in the dental industry, and like one of the things that is a little bit challenging is that, and sometimes a little frustrating, is that there are issues sometimes that can happen with the teeth. I'm thinking like in particular actually of this disease that has become really more common in the last 10 years and been diagnosed a lot. And it's called equine odontoclastic tooth resorption and hypercementosis. And so it is sad, I guess, to me that there hasn't been more significant research into the causes and the treatments of that for horses, because basically what happens is the incisors start hyper erupting, and there's a lot of inflammation, and like the only thing that is prescribed as treatment is to extract the teeth. And it's become much, much more prevalent like in the last 10 years. So, and I've only ever seen it in horses that have been power floated, or, you know, significantly overfloated, but actually only power floated. And so it's just, you know, it's just something to be aware of, that like, why are we not looking into what might cause this, and why is it more recently becoming more prevalent? And, you know, I don't go around thinking about it all day or anything like that, but I think it would be really cool to have a little bit more collaboration and openness within the industry that isn't maybe so restricted by economics, to try and expand on different ways that we can help horses, since we have domesticated them.
I like it. We'll get into a bunch more on that topic a little bit later on. And that gave me several notes to take on other things to ask you questions about. So that was a good one.
Cool.
Feral or spoiled? Which would you rather deal with?
It doesn't really bother me too much either way. I have worked with some horses that were pretty feral. I do very occasionally come across, it's usually a mule, honestly. They're usually mules, but that are pretty feral. And sometimes I have to tell the people that it's not appropriate to try and do dental work with them if they're like, if you can't halter them or you can't catch them comfortably and stuff like that. But I'd be happy to like try and work with them all day on catching and stuff, but that's not really what I do. And then the spoiled horses are just, you know, it's not really, I try to just be with them in the moment and know, I keep reminding myself, you know, because if it gets a little irritating, it's like, this is not the horse, this is the human, like coming through the horse. And then I have to accept that too, you know, and like that's okay too. It's just people, they don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to create that horse. But we haven't learned enough yet, you know, to create something different.
I think you just gave rise to a new lightning round question. Now I'm
Oh.
going to ask people, if a horse bites you, is it okay to slap the owner?
Yeah, yeah. Just turn around, like just you got to alter that. Well, because I don't like come into their space anymore. I feel like if I can block them and my timing is perfect, then I will. But, or not perfect, you know, but it's as good as it can get for right now. And then I'm always, hopefully, timing is getting better. If I can just block them when they come into my space, then that's fine. But if I come back into their space, then I've kind of already missed the opportunity, and it's not really effective then. Um, so
Spoken like someone who actually understands timing.
yeah, you'd have to just like block the horse and then do like a 180 and just across the person's face. Hopefully they're standing like right behind you.
I think we could affect change if we instituted that. Could be a bumper sticker too. I'm gonna have to
You
figure out a way to
start working on the move, and then we'll like Jedi it.
We could talk with Mark and get a martial art kind of thing going here. He could give it a Japanese name, and
Yes.
I'm yeah, we got something I'll be interviewing him here before long, so yeah, we're gonna play with that for sure.
Yeah. you'd have to be careful because if you get that energy flowing, like you could accidentally, like the person could go flying.
I'm not hearing a problem here, Gretchen. Um, what is your least favorite barn chore?
Oh, I don't really like, I'm trying to think. Um, I don't know. I have this thing with my equipment, so like every day, sometime at the end of the day, I thoroughly clean all my equipment in hot water, like really hot water. And it's this thing where I try to I try to kind of enjoy it when I'm doing it. Like I try to be like it's like a ritual. And then I'm like thankful for my equipment and all this stuff. But sometimes it's like so exhausting because it happens at like 9:30 at night. And I'm just like, oh, right now I have to clean my equipment. So it's not really, it doesn't always happen in the barn, but it's related for sure.
How about your favorite barn chore?
I like sweeping. I would say sweeping probably if there is like an aisle to sweep. And then I don't know, like I don't mind cleaning out water troughs and I've always really liked water, so that's kind of a good activity, scrubbing them out.
Favorite words of wisdom?
Oh, I don't know. Um, I don't know. I'm at a loss. I don't know how I would just put like a few words to something.
Well,
I'm
do you have
trying
any
to-
like I'm imagining for you like something from the Tao Te Ching or something like that, a mantra or
Oh,
something
how
like
did
that
you
that
know
you
I like that book? That's
just a shot in the dark. I don't know. But
okay. No, I mean, I feel like wisdom, I don't know. I just feel like it's more like in the most present moments, there aren't really very many words. I don't really know what to say specifically because it would depend on the situation, but I feel like there's this like place of silence that like everything exists there at the same time somehow, and yet it's also peaceful.
I think I got it for you. Go with the flow and find stillness.
Yes,
How
that's
about
great.
that? Huh? Okay. New bumper
Yeah.
sticker. All right. We'll have that t-shirt out next month. Huh?
I do like, okay, that reminded me of like keep calm and carry on. I like
Okay.
that.
Uh-huh. Not chive on, just carry on.
Carry on. I saw you took a note on that one. Are you
I'm
like,
taking lots of notes. Yep. Yep. Don't feel like I'm not paying attention to you. Yeah, I've got a notepad here. So my mind is works very fast, but it's also like my thoughts are trying to capture sparks popping out of a campfire. If I don't get them down pretty quick, they're gone forever.
okay, so
So
that's gonna come back around later.
yes, yes. Or
Okay.
maybe. I don't I got a lot of notes, so we won't have time to get to all of it. But crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Crunchy.
All right. Last couple people have said smooth, and I've been secretly disappointed because crunchy clearly is the answer, right? Texture of food is just as important as everything else, is it not? I mean, like, anyway,
It is. I used to like smooth, like when I was a kid, but I don't know, I graduated or something.
would you tell us something unexpected about you?
I don't really know like what is um expected. Like I I'm actually a pretty good figure skater. I don't know,
Okay.
that might not be, yeah, because when I was a kid, I did competitive figure skating until I was like 9, like 8 or 9 years old. I used to get up at like 4:30 in the morning and go to the ice skating rink before school, and then I'd go back after school. And at some point, I guess I told my parents that I no longer wanted to ice skate and I wanted to take horseback riding lessons instead. So,
Okay. That is unexpected. I did not see that coming. If you could choose any new skill or superpower or ability, and this could be anything, flying, x-ray vision, healing, whatever your mind can come up with, what would you choose?
Okay, well, in real life, this like magical thing that I'm working on is to open up like as much as possible my natural psychic abilities while still being completely grounded and participating in like normal everyday activities.
I feel utterly compelled now to psychically ask you the next question, and you just answer whatever in the
See if I
world you
can
think
get
I
it.
might have asked. So I'm sending it
Oh,
your way right
I
now.
don't know if it works
Both
like
hands on
that.
the temples.
Nope. No, I didn't
Okay.
get it.
You didn't get anything? Okay. We'll keep working on it.
I think you need to work on it.
You know what? That probably definitely was a problem on my end. I will concede that. No question. Thoughts or feelings? Are you more the cerebral, analytical, logical, got to have a reason for everything, or are you more the kind
No,
of person that believes in psychic abilities and
I'm
stuff like that?
I'm I am
Surprise
feeling.
no one and answer the question,
I
Gretchen.
am
Go right ahead.
feelings. Like, well, it no, I mean it's interesting if you think about it though, because like the work that I do is very physical. And I do have to use my logistical thinking brain. And I also like basically like when I'm feeling teeth, it like translates a picture. Like I can see clearly like what the teeth look like in my mind's eye while I'm feeling them. And so like I know my brain like, has to work in many different ways. And I think it's really cool, like the integration of that. So, um, I really enjoy the place of no thought, and I think that as humans, we tend to use that, logistical and like the prefrontal cortex is like so developed and it can inhibit sometimes our communication like with other species and our interactions and also just our normal like healthy relaxation and but it's part of being here to also have thoughts and to be able to communicate verbally and things like that.
Cool.
Yeah. But I'm much more direct like um in the heart and like telepathic and like just in that feeling space is a little easier for me. Yeah,
What would you have been professionally if not within the horse world?
that's like a really interesting question. I don't even know if I like what I would be doing if I would even like necessarily be here. Like I can't really imagine like not working with horses. And I mean, I think maybe like an animal, like I could work with like dolphins or something, or some other type of animal. I might be like I don't know, uh, some kind of translator or, but I can't really imagine it without horses. I tried to do that for a little while. Like my parents wanted me to go to college and they really wanted that. And, it just was really, it didn't work out for me. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing. So I'm so grateful every day, like that I get to work with horses and be around them. And it doesn't matter as much to me, like even what I'm doing with them sometimes.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Decisive if I am in alignment, I would say. Like, if you're like in alignment and you're pretty clear, then it's easy. It's just
Mhm.
like boom, boom, boom. You just go with the flow.
Go with the flow and find stillness.
And find stillness. I don't know
Dong.
where, yeah, find stillness. That's cool. That sounds like maybe more like something with Mark, like if you talk to him, he's
I
stillness.
probably should mention when we say Mark, we're talking about Mark Rashid. He's the mutual friend we're referring to, just in case y'all haven't figured that out.
Yeah, because you already talked about him for a minute earlier.
Yeah, but I think I just called him Mark. I may not
Yeah,
have, but just so they're not wondering who this is, just some random Mark out there.
yeah.
Um,
Mr. Rashid.
do
Maybe
you
he
have
will listen to this. That'd be cool.
what's that?
Maybe he will listen to this.
Maybe so. Maybe so. If Chrissy walks up and points in your face and say, "Don't you ever call him Mr. Rashid," then we'll know if they listened or not. Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
I do. I would say like my speculum is really important and I love my speculum. But I also a couple years ago I got a long bamboo whip from um Mark Russell's wife that still makes those and like finishes them and stuff. And
Hmm.
I really liked it because um when I used to ride, I had a number of instances where I was taught to use a crop and I used it or a whip in ways that were uncomfortable for me and the horse. And in kind of coming back to working with horses like on the ground and under saddle, um, I I was hesitant to like wear any spurs or carry any whip or have any piece of equipment that I might use wrongly against the horse. And then like I heard, I guess on one of Mark Russell's DVDs, he talks about like the bamboo and the use of the bamboo. And it was just a really beautiful way to talk about how a whip should be used and just that it is a natural object. So I feel like it brings a little bit more harmony like with the horse. And so I like using that. I use it with my horse to kind of help move her energy sometimes when I'm working on the ground and it's really nice.
I like that. He is one of the people that I never got a chance to meet or work with that I really wish I had. He seems like a just a super cool guy that would be just like dripping of knowledge and you just sit there quiet and just absorb everything you possibly could from him. But
Yeah,
anyway,
like I came across, I guess I kind of discovered him probably through Jillian Kreinbring, because she had, I'm pretty sure that's kind of how I got curious. And then, um, of course, he had already passed, so I would have never met him or anything. But as soon as I like found his work, and then there were some DVDs too that came out more recently. Like there's one called Releasing the Job Hole and Neck that's really cool. And amazing footage that's like really clear. And so like when I discovered that stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is so rad, you know? And I remember going back because I went to continuing at the dental school, and I went to Spencer and I was like, have you heard of this guy? And he broke out a bunch of old pictures and stuff, and he's like, yeah, I know.
Mhm.
So yeah, would have been a cool person to get to be around. But I feel like his energy is still like it still permeates like through a lot of the horse industry, through people, and however that kind of filters through.
Cold showers or cold food forever, if you had to pick one.
I would definitely pick cold food.
Okay.
I'm like a big like hot water is like it's important to me.
All right. I have a few. I feel like since we've got this conversation on dentistry plan, but you are a high level rider, I want to give you riding props. So I'm going to ask you some of my riding specific questions here
Oh
too.
my God.
So
Okay.
are your hands or your legs better?
Like, are one of them better than the other for me?
Yeah, for
Um,
riding. Like, so do you feel like you're
I
really
think
keen with seat and legs or hands?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I think probably that I have a little bit better like awareness and subtlety in my hands. Um and I've tried to kind of shift away from that. I had this thing for a while after I stopped riding because I really missed riding, and I really missed the sensation of feeling the horse's mouth like through my hands. And so that was kind of an interesting thing just to feel like I was missing it. But I think I probably should develop more like my my sensitivity in my seat and my pelvis and my legs. And that's probably a little behind the curve.
So I have to ask if this is Freudian or not. So you just phrased that as you missed feeling the horse's mouth through your hands.
Yeah.
So is that pre or
Now all
post
I'm doing
equine
all day.
dentistry? Yeah.
Right. Well, a lot of okay, a lot of dental practitioners though, they don't feel the teeth. They look. They just look like with a light. Or vets. But yeah, but that was not intended, so that's kind of funny. Now I'm literally feeling their mouth in my hands, whereas before there was a little bit more distance there through the reins, or yeah.
So non-intended consciously, but maybe subconsciously, like you yeah. I
So
think you know
there
what
was
I'm
some
saying
kind of
here. Yeah.
transition there. Yeah.
Left or right lead? So do you have to be more
I
conscious
like
and
I
thoughtful
like
about
the right
one or
I like the right lead.
okay, so now I have a follow-up question because this is a a hypothesis that I have. Do you know if you are right or left-footed?
Yeah,
So,
so like okay, so like I used to surf and skateboard and snowboard. I grew up in California, and in kind of like what was then like a relatively smaller like little surfing town. And so I definitely can go both ways because I like always have been big on trying to be ambidextrous and like switch stuff up. But naturally I would have my left foot forward. So that I think would be more the left lead. But there's a number of different things. Then you got the hands and the shoulders, and so
but like if I threw a soccer ball out there and I said, kick that as far as you can, which foot are you kicking it with?
my right foot. But
Okay.
I would put my balance onto my left foot so that I could use my right foot to kick it, right?
Okay. Well, I gotta say you're the fly in the ointment on that hypothesis right now, but I'm gonna keep going after it because nothing's 100%.
Okay, because it's supposed to like match up.
No, I'm assuming so. Like so far, most people have been left lead, but also right foot, and right foot would drive you into the left lead. So that's kind of my
Yeah.
thought. But you're right foot and right lead, it sounds like. So
Yeah, and hopefully I wouldn't maybe be driving like into the canter. I would just be like allowing.
I just had a big Facebook deal about that, so we could get into that later on too, if you like. Let me write that down.
I mean, I don't know.
Well,
You got like you're the professional, you know? I don't know.
all that
I
means is
don't
I get
ride
paid.
for
It doesn't mean I'm any good.
it.
What is the best smell in the barn?
Really good, fresh hay. First cut hay. Yeah.
Okay. Sweet, salty, or spicy?
All of the above. I would make like with cooking, I like to mix like spicy and sweet and different stuff. Yeah.
What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Pterodactyl.
Ah, you're the first, I think, first pterodactyl person.
Yeah.
That's an
I would
interesting one.
I would want to know like how big they actually are, but I just think it'd be pretty cool to see a big thing like that up in the sky.
I think that's one of those that had scales to it. So like we're thinking pterodactyl, but I believe within what we're thinking of as a pterodactyl, there was kind of a small, medium, and large versions. The largest version was like 15 feet tall and
Wow.
freaking huge. Another little thing you may or may not know, they recently found a dinosaur larynx fossilized that was intact, and they reverse engineered it and 3D printed it and then ran air through it to find out what kind of noise the dinosaurs actually made. Because we have, these movies where they roar and all of this kind of stuff. They honked like geese. That's basically what it was. They honked like, so can you imagine the T-Rex chasing you honking like a goose? Like it just totally ruins the whole.
Yeah, I don't know. Like that stuff is really fascinating to me. I really don't know how they can say like it was like this or it was like that or it,
Ah,
like I
yeah.
just I mean, I know we have like carbon dating and some different things, but I just don't know how you can kind of say like it's outside of our perception because we're only thinking within like how the world is structured now. And if it was a lot different, then how can we have awareness for that?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's all just a theory. And then the last question, have you ever had a UFO encounter?
I don't think so. I definitely have, like spoken with people who feel that they can channel like extraterrestrials and um so that's not really a UFO though. Like that's more it's still like
Mm,
uh
same difference. Yeah.
off planet, but it's not
Mhm.
like an object. Because I don't really think like again, it's like how could we with our vision, like if it was something in a completely different realm, like would we really see it as this like solid object flying? Like how does that work?
All depends on what kind of mushroom you ate prior, right? All right. Well, that concludes. Let me do a little tabulation here. Gretchen Deane, you are at 4,219 points, which makes you our high score of all time on the lightning round questions. And this entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence choice.
I'm gonna go with the awkward silence, and I'm not gonna be awkward during it though.
It's always the right choice to choose the awkward side. It's the greatest Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
All right. Well, everybody would have a bit of a feel for your personality now, I would hope. So, within the horse business, would you give us kind of the 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do?
Okay, so I work with horses to help restore and maintain a natural, neutral alignment and healthy movement patterns through the jaw, which affects their whole body. And yeah, I travel around and it's really cool. I get to do some body work, mostly based in the Masterson Method. Um, Although I do have some other techniques that I've learned to integrate. And so I evaluate like how the horse is moving in their body and in their jaw and in their mouth, and then can understand how to float the teeth in a way that fits the individual to allow for natural, healthy movement patterns. Yeah.
I think that's very well articulated. And I'm certainly looking forward to learning more about that. Why don't we back up a little bit? And you seem to have, you've talked a lot about the ice skating and the other things. So I would I would put you more as a physical kind of a person. I would imagine your awareness of your body and where you are in time and space and balance and all of that stuff is much higher than the average person. And so you got on into a show jumping career pretty early on, had the opportunity to work with some pretty big people in that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I wanted to be a horse trainer when I from the time I was like 12. And I had a coach. I mean, I had several different teachers, but I remember when I was about 12 or 13, I had a coach for a while in California that I just really admired, and he was very quiet and thoughtful with horses. And I just thought that would be so cool, like to be all the time around horses all day and have that be kind of like who I was, I guess, when I was a kid. And then my parents really wanted me to go to college and make money so that I could have a horse if I wanted to. But mostly, I guess, so that I could, I don't know, be successful or whatever. So I tried that for a little while, and it didn't really work out. And I got a working student job. I had already competed in show jumping, in high school. And so, when I was about 21, I got a working student job. And then from there, I just was able to get jobs riding. And I started teaching some lessons, and I worked primarily for hunter jumper businesses. And it was really, really fun. And then it became over time a little bit uncomfortable because there were some um, variances in the way that I wanted to work with the horses and in what the people that I was working for wanted me to do with the horses and how they wanted me to do it. And so I got kind of burnt out on that section of the industry. It was very competitive and like, okay, like at one point I was working at a barn in California, in a very wealthy area, and the customers would generally get a new horse each year. so that they could compete on that horse for specific levels and classes. And there was very little relationship between the rider and the horse. And a lot of those horses would not stay sound for very long, because it was just like part of the cycle, and then they'd get a new horse the next year. So there wasn't really a lot of consideration for the animal, like over the course of that horse's lifetime or anything like that. Um, and I also worked for people that wanted me to like abuse horses in ways that I did not want to do. And then I was really into young horses. Like I really liked riding green horses, and I would always kind of get these horses that were like 7, 8, 9 years old that other people maybe just hadn't really been able to figure out. And I really enjoyed kind of working with them and helping them. At least I thought I was helping them, and it was really fun. And so then I got curious about like colt starting. And at one point, like I went over to Ireland because I had a customer in California that I had been working with, and she had a barn that she knew the people really well. And it was a high level show jumping barn, and they had a lot of really nice like Grand Prix horses. And I ended up being like, can we work with like those feral ponies across the street? Like, and that's like what I wanted to do. And so we did that. And then I got injured a couple times doing that. And so eventually I decided that I needed to figure out something a little bit different. And I discovered the body work, and then I got right into the dentistry following that.
Well, I kind of feel a little bit compelled to just ask you this, and forgive my bluntness for it, but what the hell is neuromuscular dentistry in a horse? Like, what does that even mean? What's going on there?
So like I learned from Spencer LaFleur, and he created a school for what used to be called natural balance dentistry. And this is just like my understanding, there were a couple other people originally involved in that program, and then they kind of split. And more recently, within the last 6 or 7 years, or probably even 5 years, Spencer has rearticulated the name for the practice as neuromuscular horse dentistry, which is better suited, I think, to what they are studying within that program. And so he teaches about how all of the teeth are connected to nerve pathways that run through the cranial nervous system and branch out through the horse's body. And so how those teeth are stimulated really affects the horse's neuromuscular health. And there are a number of other aspects to it. Basically, like the paradigm in that school is that the incisors or the front teeth guide the alignment for the joints, for the TM joints, and then the molar tables display a pattern of wear depending on how the joints are moving. And there's a whole lot of other stuff, but that's kind of why he calls it neuromuscular horse dentistry, is because we are affecting, when we float the horse's teeth, their neuromuscular health. And like I have found that to be true, although there is no research dedicated or produced to some of the results that we have found. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to consolidate the whole practice and to explain all the different aspects of it. But like, I never knew anything about teeth when I was riding. And looking back now, I had some horses that were very challenged, and in a number of different ways. Like, okay, one horse in a barn that I was working in at one point, he had like no muscle, like he had like no top line, his flanks were all dished out, and he was not like posturally in extension or kind of like upside down, but he just was like very atrophied, and he was not eating well. He wouldn't eat his grain. And um like I don't know how he did with hay, because at that time I wouldn't have known to ask or to check on that. But when I rode him, it was really, really difficult for this horse to have any lateral release through the pole. It was really difficult for him to release through the jaw. Like, he was very braced in the bridle, and it was difficult for him to engage the hindquarters at all. So he'd get like really heavy on the forehand and super braced. And anyways, I know now looking back that like that horse was extremely power floated. And a lot of the horses in that barn were as well. Um, and so like that wasn't something that I knew about then, but now after going through the neuromuscular horse dentistry school, I kind of can put together some of those pieces and go, oh, look, like this horse had like significant overfloating, like he was really struggling. And when I went to the dental school, because I didn't have any like understanding previously of wrongs or rights within the dental industry, I didn't come with a bunch of opinions of like, oh, power floating's bad, or this should not happen, or we shouldn't be tying horses' heads up when we float them, or anything like that. But when I arrived at the school, it all made sense to me, because they were teaching us how to work with the horse in a relatively relaxed way and allow the horse to process what was going on and stand in a neutral, natural posture and balance the teeth to their natural alignment. And so like that all just, I went, yeah, this seems great. Like it, of course it makes sense. Um, if that kind of makes sense. So I didn't have like all the frustration at all the other ways that dentistry is done.
Yeah. You didn't have a bunch of stuff to unlearn before you could learn, and preconceived biases when you walked in. Yep.
Yeah, but like I don't believe, as far as I'm aware, there might be a couple little programs now, but I don't think there are very many that teach you how to work with the horse in that way when you're doing dentistry.
Does Spencer's school still exist, or is it no longer?
Yeah, I think they're
Okay.
going through some changes, but yes, it is still in existence. And I think it's been about 20 years, yeah, since he
Okay.
started that school.
Well, we always do links to people's stuff and all, but we'll include a link to Spencer's website as well,
Yeah.
in the show notes.
I believe it's the Center for Neuromuscular Horse Dentistry. I'm pretty sure that's where it still goes to the website.
Okay. So I will have to say, in my work with bits and stuff like that, I do get into some things about teaching about the teeth ages and changes and certain things like that, caps and premolars and that kind of stuff. But I would have to say that I fairly rarely find that the teeth are the problem. The way that I would say that is, if you're doing regular dental work and your horse is like cared for and all of that stuff's in place, then probably we're not going to find issues there. I would also say that statement of if the dentistry going on with the horse is good, that's one of those big statements. Like it's a short phrase, but they're like the power floating and stuff you've talked about. If you find issues there, and I'll let you get in a lot more than that than I'm going to say, but let's say they've removed so much tooth that the rear molars on the right side are no longer contacting one another. You've got a big gap there or something. Well, I can't fix that. I can't affect that whatsoever. But assuming everything is set up and balanced the way that it should be, I tend to seldom find that the teeth were the issue with the bitting problem. The most common thing I find is the hands of the rider are the problem, and that's where we really need to be working. So that's my perspective on how I see things. What would you say to that? Do you come across a lot of scenarios where you need to affect some pretty significant change in the horse's mouth to help them out, or you've seen things taken way too far and there's not much you can do now, or what?
So I don't think that very many horses have it very easy in terms of the alignment and the occlusion or the contact in the teeth and how that supports their natural movement and how that supports healthy riding postures and the release of the jaw and the poll through the bit. But I also think that there is a big gap in the education of people, like you're saying, about how to educate a horse to release the jaw and the poll through the use of a bit or a bridle. But like the short answer is like, no, I don't think that very many horses have easy, healthy dental alignment. I think that there are a large percentage, like high, like 95%. Like, and this is being like pretty specific, and like, because I feel like if you look specifically at what's going on in the mouth, there are a lot of things that we can help them with that a lot of horses don't have that support. But there are, a really high percentage that it's not that easy for them. And I think horses are super forgiving. And of course you can get one horse that has like a shark fin sticking into their tongue and they're going around like making it work. and then you get another horse that has like a tiny little spot, it's like the Princess and the Pea, and they're like rearing. And then you fix it and it goes away. But I think that both things are an issue, like you're saying. So I can't, like, just because I can balance the teeth doesn't mean that all of a sudden your horse is gonna understand all these things that it didn't previously. But I think it will be a lot easier for them to learn and access, and even for an older horse, because my feeling is that the way that they kind of interact with us and the way that they learn, it's not all separate, like how we want to say it's like A, B, C, D, whether that means like it's behavioral, it's physical, it's emotional, or that means that it's a bit problem, it's a tooth problem, it's a saddle fit problem. Like they don't categorize all that. Or whether it's a misunderstanding, like it's like this horse doesn't know what I'm talking about. It's just a translation issue. Like that doesn't come in different categories for them. It's all just in one big package. So if I try to ask a horse for lateral release at the pole, and it's not very physically easy for them because of the way that the teeth are floated. There's going to be a lot more resistance in that learning process, right? And usually if it is pretty easy, I think it's pretty easy, but the person has to obviously have a clear idea of what they're looking for and hopefully have some self-awareness and maybe be soft and things like that as well.
This will be a little bit of a sidebar I'll cut out, but I'm hearing some storms come across here. So just to give you fair warning, my internet does suck and we could just get cut off and I lose internet here in a little bit. I was just checking the radar and it looks like I got a pretty good little line coming. So if we get cut out, that's what happened. So just hopefully it survives and everything is fine, but historically internet here sucks. So
you guys get like tornadoes and stuff too?
Sometimes, yeah. I'm about 20 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, so hurricanes are also on the menu, although we're good on that right now. Yeah, but we'll often get, if we have a hurricane come through, it will spur tornadoes on the perimeter and all of that. So good times.
All right.
One thing I wanted, so you brought up pain tolerance right there. And this is one of my pet peeves, is that people always talk about horses being stoic. And some horses are stoic and have a real high tolerance for pain, just like people. And some horses are absolute weenies. Dr. Jeff Tucker is the other equine dentist that I've interviewed. I consider him a friend of mine, and he says that all the time. He'll get into a horse's mouth and like the cheek is just absolutely shredded. It's like ground beef or something in there, and he'll look at the person and say, "You're not really having any problems with this one riding, are you?" And they'll say, "No." You say, "Yeah, I can tell he's chewed his cheek to pieces and he's not reactive to it at all." And then, like you just said, there'll be another horse that'll have essentially a pimple in there and they're super sensitive about it, and he'll look and say, "So this one's giving you some trouble," and you file off a little bit of tooth and then everything is solved. So do you find that interesting? Does that make your job easier or harder? And how would you say that ties in? Because you're not just a dentist, you also do body work. So you kind of have that added element to what you're doing.
So I think that like, because the whole body is connected and the whole horse is connected, and then the people are connected through the horse also, that there could be any number of issues, and sometimes it presents as pain or discomfort in one area of the body, but it might actually be coming from something else. So like when I'm working with a horse, like I want ideally the horse to be participating in a way that they can let me know if I get to an area that's particularly uncomfortable when I'm working in the mouth. And there are a lot of different things that are interesting. Like if they're sore in the front feet, those nerve pathways go up through the incisors, and a lot of times they'll be reactive when you adjust the incisors, and it's like a neural reaction. It's not like they have an opinion about it. But like I also find that our understanding of how much discomfort the horse is experiencing has a lot to do with the people and what they are able or willing to observe or receive from the horse as well. Because you can have all different levels, right? Like the horse could be checked out, or the person, I mean, a lot of times the person, no, they're going fine. And well, how are they turning right? Can they turn right? Well, they flipped over one time, like it's okay, but they're going great.
Your definition of fine and mine are a little bit different there, yeah.
Yeah. So like, and like when I was first starting out, like it was hard sometimes to let go of people that seemed not to have any perception of change in the horse, like because they'd just be like, oh no, I don't feel any different, but then I started working with people that were very sensitive and high level riders and horse people, really educated horse people, and people that have a really strong connection to their horses, and they would tell me all sorts of different things. Like sometimes I'm even like, wow, that's so cool that you told me that, because I would have never thought like that would be a change that you would notice, you know. So I think it's hard for us to say like what pain is for them.
I agree with that. I think I try to look at pain as a data point. So if I see a horse in pain or having a trouble here, I don't really have an emotional response to that. I look at that as information and helping me to go other places or fix whatever. Like one of the examples I use is that no one causes horses as much physical pain as veterinarians do. I mean, they're constantly sticking them with needles and, torquing them around this way or flexing that. And, can I hurt your knee? Oh, yeah, I can. Well, we know there's a problem in the knee. And so I don't think that's an immoral or unethical sort of a thing to do. Sometimes it's the only way you go about getting the information that you need in order to ultimately help the horse. Sometimes training is that way as well.
Yeah.
Where you find those resistance points of discomfort. That doesn't necessarily mean stop. That just means here's the problem I need to work on and help this horse through,
Yeah, or maybe like here's where I need to soften. But like the thing that you were saying about their cheek being all cut up too is interesting, because I've had the experience of like working with vets, and sometimes when a horse's cheek is roughed up like that, it's because they're not rotating in a way that is natural through the jaw. And so they actually are having a more vertical pattern of movement and catching the cheek in between the upper and lower molars. That's not always the case, but sometimes that can be the case. And so if that is the case, floating away the edge and taking away the sharp points, like, and I'm putting that like in quotations because that's a really negotiable term, but that's not going to fix the problem if they're not moving well. It's just gonna come back, or it's never gonna go away, because if they're just catching the cheek and there's nothing sharp there, and you don't change the movement pattern, then that's going to keep happening, and it's more like a callus even at that point.
So this brings up something for me that I think through this conversation I'm figuring out a little bit about. But so the TMJ is a weird joint. It's not the same kind of joint that all of like the knee joint when we're thinking about cartilage on cartilage in this it's a kind of looser weird in my mind kind of joint. And so this comes from Dr. Tucker, and I'm wondering what your thoughts would be on this. And it's a research project that was done. He was just the source on it. But so in vet schools, they have a certain caustic chemical that they can inject into a horse's joint, and it will cause temporary pain there. Say for 20 minutes, it's going to inflame that area and cause pain. And they use it like to teach students how to identify lameness, because we know this horse is sound, but I injected this into the right stifle or whatever, and now he trots off. And so we know absolutely that the right stifle is what is causing the pain that we're seeing right here, and so forth. And they have done that in the TMJ. And the only observable difference that they find, and I'll let you expound on this a little bit more, but like horses tend to either be clockwise chewers or counterclockwise chewers. So they don't chew straight up and down like we might think of. They chew in a circular pattern, grinding the molars and the grass and stuff there. And the only thing that they find if they inject the right TMJ or the left TMJ is that they will change course, but they don't change like number of chews per minute. There's no other observable objective measure of what that pain does other than it'll change clockwise or counterclockwise, as I understand it. So what does that bring to mind for you? I used to think that meant that TMJ isn't an area that really causes us a whole lot of trouble, and I don't think anything like that anymore. I just think it makes the TMJ even more of a weird and complex thing to have trouble with. So what does that make you think of?
Well, that makes me think a few things. I would think that is an interesting way to evaluate pain, is just by saying, are they chewing on that side? Because like some horses will eat hay no matter what, and they'll have like a tooth sticking out into the side of their cheek and they will still chew on that side even. But I would also wonder, like, because when I evaluate their movement, like I look at like, well, how, I mean, there's an infinite different number of ways that they can move. It's not just left, right, up, down, or are they rotating on this side or not? It's like, well, what is the quality of that rotation, and what is the occlusion pattern like? And what is, like Spencer calls it, translation, when they actually grind the molars across each other. What is that all like? So, because they can be just like, for example, they might have a restriction in a front limb and it might cause some tension up their neck, and then they might start moving in a more vertical pattern on the same side. And so they're not really having a wide rotation on that side, but it might be coming from somewhere completely different in the body. Or they might conformationally just be set up like a little tight-headed quarter horse, and that has a lot of muscular tension, like in C1 and around C1 and 2, and through the pole in the upper neck. And they naturally just kind of have this tighter, a little bit more vertical thing happening when they chew. So I don't know. And then it also makes me think that when the horse, like, I think that they experience pain much differently. And so, you know, I'm thinking, like, how does that horse move? If you ask the horse to release the pole and the jaw needs to relax a little bit down or forward, and then there's relaxation, and you ask for a lateral release through the pole and the jaw needs to disclude or drop away a little bit in the opposite direction and release forward for them to come through in that movement. Like, how is that working? Like, how much of a brace is there? And like, which side is it on? And sometimes there's pain in the TM joints. It's coming from somewhere else in the body. Sometimes they don't palpate in the TMJs, but their dental is atrocious. You know what I mean? And then they're sore in the back because of it. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack there, I think.
Well, why don't we, you talked a little bit about your tool, so why don't you tell us about that? What does Gretchen Deane's toolkit look like? You stroll into the barn in some Birkenstocks, I'm guessing, or something like that, and you got what in your hand there?
Birkenstocks.
I don't know.
Okay, like when I was in dental school, in Spencer's school, because we learned to call our equipment our instruments. And then if someone said, like, yeah, and then I got my tool out, then everyone in the whole class would go, "You're a tool." because we were not, supposed to call them tools, because
Okay.
instrument is what we learned to say. But yeah, so I have like, I don't know, I have my bag of instruments. I have about 7, 8, 9. I have like nine different molar floats that I normally carry with me. And then I have an incisor float. They're small, and Spencer created them. He developed the design for them. And so um, they're set at different angles for reaching different parts of the mouth. And then like I have like 3 different floats that allow me to adjust the lower 11s, like just for example, like so that specific tooth, or the 11s in general, like I have like 4 or 5 different floats that will specifically let me kind of get in there and articulate different adjustments there. And they're some of them are triangular, and then but you only use like a flat. We have carbide blades, and then some of them are slim, so they're just like real flat. And then I have my speculum, my trusty speculum, and then I have like some rongers and stuff that in most states I'm probably not supposed to use without veterinary supervision. Um,
I've never even heard of a ronger. Now I'm
Oh,
intrigued. What
just
is that?
for caps, like
Oh, okay.
baby teeth, or I mean you could do an extraction. I don't do extractions because they're subcutaneous, and um yeah. But yeah, that's what my bag looks like. And
And these all attached to like a 36-volt power head or something like that that plugs
yes.
into the wall, or yeah, boom.
And then I know I forgot all the other stuff. No, I don't have any power tools. I don't like. Okay, like the school that I went to was like very anti-power tool. And Spencer, at the time when he went to school, power floats were just coming out. And so I think he experienced some pretty traumatic things associated with the use of those tools. And I have very rarely, like in um 2 different cases that I could think of out of like, I don't know, at least I'm gonna say at least like 3 or 4 thousand horses, but I don't know exactly how many horses I've worked with. But in these 2 cases, in one of them, the horse had an extremely hyper erupted tooth, like over erupted all the way in the back. It was an 11. And she like was not moving at all in the opposite SI. And this is like a rescue horse that someone got. And she's not that old. But the tooth was like unopposed, so it's not stimulated in the same way. And so like I referred to a vet to have them come out and use a power float to adjust that tooth so that then I could come back and like rebalance it at an angle that's appropriate and try to gradually help that whole thing open up. Um, but that's like a really rare case. So I would like to say that they can be used in ways to help horses, but I have not seen on very many occasions that actually happen almost ever. And I haven't found them to be necessary almost ever if it's done well. And if you start with a horse when they're young and you allow their natural alignment to develop, and you have consistent visits with them to guide, that balance, then unless there was like an impact injury or in an event that happened, you really wouldn't get into situations where you have that much excess tooth. Even, I would say, even with genetic deviations, I don't think that that really would happen because it just doesn't happen that fast.
Yeah. And that when I kind of say like with the bit problems that it's almost never the teeth, that's really the horse I'm generally dealing with. It's not, it's a horse that has been cared for and things have never gotten way out of whack. And so we don't have a shark fin in the tongue or something like that. It's generally all that's under control and we have a good base to work from. Obviously, if you got stuff way out of whack, then definitely it could be the teeth. That's just not a very typical horse that I work with.
Yeah. But like I think for a lot of people, it's hard to say like it's the teeth. Like, well, it's always the teeth. Like the teeth are always a part of the body and they're rarely done in a way that make things easy for the horse. If the angles are too flat in the molars, that can really affect the anterior and posterior movement in the jaw, and that affects how the horse can flex and have neutral postures through the lumbosacral junction and the pelvis. So, like, just saying that it's done on a regular basis, I don't think is as good as we can do. Like, we can start to understand more and be open to more. And, you know, maybe it's a little bit more like a hoof care practice where the practitioners are understanding more specifics about what can help individual horses to have better alignment so that they can move better and keep the cervical spine healthier, you know, for riding horses especially, and the whole spine and make it easier for them to learn. Yeah.
All right. Well, that kind of brings up, I think we need to get to our sponsor for this episode and pay the bills here. So if you'll give me just a second, Gretchen, our sponsor for this episode is Tim's Power Equine Dentistry. You can buy a hand float in any equine tack catalog out there. Should you? No. Horse teeth are big and strong. You need more power. At times, at Tim's Power Equine Dentistry, we use the most powerful tools known to man to grind away all your horse's problems. We've worked with engineers at Milwaukee and designed our own prototype line of tools with 4 electric motors in sequence. These babies aren't battery powered. They require 240 volts and a harness to suspend them from the ceiling. Who's got power? We've got the power. We'll put enough ketamine in your buddy to drop an elephant, but have him safely suspended in a sling within another sling and inside of a stock built for buffalo. The speculums we use are made of titanium and hydraulically powered. We'll get a good look at what's going on and can easily reach those back corners with more power. With our premium power floats, we'll remove enough tooth so that you won't have to have them done again for up to 3 years. Have you even noticed that some horses' molars are slanted with the bottom rows high on the inside, the top ones longest on the outside? Well, we can correct that genetic flaw and get those teeth as level as a mountain lake. Are you tired of banging your bits into those pesky canine teeth? We'll grind those babies down to the gum line every time. Have you heard that you have to wait until a horse is 5 or 6 for them to lose all their baby teeth? We can pull all of them at once and save you money with our Jaws of Life teeth pullers. Our Jaws of Life teeth pullers are hydraulic and strong enough to pull Excalibur from the stone, whether you're King Arthur or not. Stop wasting your money with those scam artists. We'll get her done all at once with the kind of horsepower that any horse would be proud of. Tim's Power Equine Dentistry. We've got the power, and we'll turn those points, ramps, and waves into white powder.
Oh my God.
Okay. So we got the bills paid now. I feel a little better.
Wow. I like the laugh. Like, just we're really enjoying doing all this too. It's like evil.
What?
Brutal.
What? With the plight of the world and 95% of horses not in good shape out there, what advice would you give to the average horse person, how they go about finding a competent
Oh,
equine dentist?
yeah.
How do they know what to look for, or when it's right, when it's wrong? Like how are they to figure that out?
I mean, I think it's hard, and I hate to say it, like I'm not trying to say like all horses are unwell or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like that. It's just I just think that we can do so much, we can do better. Like we can continue to do better with them for them. But I I don't know. I mean, I used to just say like go through Spencer's school and find a practitioner. Through there. And I have sometimes given people like a list of different things to ask about. Um, you'd want to start asking some questions and maybe educate a little bit yourself if you can somehow. Um, like, will your practitioner be adjusting the front teeth or only the back teeth? Um, Will they use a speculum or not at all? Will they uh, tie your horse's head up or will they be standing in a neutral position? Like, those are some things you could start to ask. Are they going to use sedation or not at all? Um, but, I think that
What
just
would be some red flag answers to some of those questions? Like if you hear that they're going to do this run for the hills, in your opinion, what would be some oh no's?
um like if the person says that they only use power tools and heavy sedation and they're not going to adjust the front teeth at all, that I would be uncomfortable with. Because if they're not going to adjust the front teeth at all and they're going to power float the back teeth, then over time there's very likely going to be some imbalance there. And if the person isn't going to use a speculum at all and they're just, no, I'm just going to do this the natural way and reach back and float some sharp points off, and we're not going to use any sedation, and the horse's head is up in the air and their eyes are bugging out of their head, like that's kind of the other end of the spectrum that also is not a fantastic option, I don't feel like. So I think that it can get as good as we can start to ask some questions like, what does the alignment look like to you? Like, how do you think my horse is moving? Like, do you think that you can help this be more comfortable for them? Um, we can even kind of go beyond like, what tools are you using, or how is the process done? But like, what is the result of the process? And maybe start to ask like even like how is that going to be evaluated or quantified? Like, are you going to keep records, and how are you evaluating their movement? Because even certain things like I know some people check the occlusion by like pushing the jaw up into the maxilla and then kind of sliding like from side to side. And that's not a natural movement pattern for the horse. So it gives us relatively little information about what their natural movement and occlusion patterns are like. They don't, that at minimum, it shows us like how they occlude when they're actually moving out in the rotation, which is not how they chew. The teeth would normally come together first with the cutting edge and then slide across if they're chewing as they're coming back up to the center in that pattern of movement. So that would be what I would be like listening for in terms of what is that pattern like. And you can start to hear more and more subtle things auditorily, in that pattern, and then observe how which direction the jaw is coming from and how it's moving, and how the tongue is moving. Like, is the hyoid tight? Is it all really choppy and rapid, or do they have like a solid, relaxed, consistent, rhythmical deal going on there? So like I would hope that eventually we can get kind of a little bit further like that, where there's more specifics even.
Do you see any differences in horses' mouths due to husbandry? So what I mean here is you got a horse turned out 24/7 grazing as God intended, and then you got this other horse in a stall fed twice a day who chews for an hour in the morning and an hour at night. Can you look in a mouth and see the changes of one versus the other? Do you have pretty strong feelings on how that works out?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so how they're kept, the position that they stand in when they eat on a regular basis, and if that changes or varies. Like if they have, even if so, like say they're eating out of a feeder and it's always in the same location in the stall, chances are that they're always going to stand in a relatively similar position. And that's probably going to cause them to chew more on one side than the other. And their head's not going to be going up and down a lot when they chew like that. So they can kind of get locked in sometimes like that, into one pattern that doesn't produce even wear. And then like how they're ridden also makes a big difference. Sometimes really higher level performance horses carry a lot of tension in I'm just gonna say like especially like in the first two cervicals, because I noticed that some of that tissue there, it can be developed in a way that it makes it more difficult for the jaw to have a normal or natural anterior posterior release, like on an ongoing basis. And so then sometimes they develop transverse ridging,
Let,
like in the
yeah,
molars.
I want you to define that a little bit because I want to. I'm sure there's going to be some people listening that have no idea what you're talking about, and I think that's a pretty key important point. So we would tend to think of the jaw as moving straight up and down or something like that, but that isn't nearly all it moves. So when you say anterior or posterior, what specifically do you mean the jaw is doing there?
So that means forward and back in relationship to the skull. So like at the TM joint, the where the temporal comes in to the mandible, so the temporal mandibular joint, like that should slide so that there's a release forward and there's a release back. And when the horse relaxes the tissues through the upper neck and the poll in a neutral posture or with the head down, or sometimes I think even in like a little bit of flexion, the jaw can release forward if it's in relaxation. But if that tissue is contracted there, or if there's imbalance in the teeth or both, it may not allow for that natural sliding movement. And then, like, when you talk about the lateral release in the pole, that has to happen. The jaw needs to release forward in relaxation, but then also it should have a little bit of a lateral slide as well, away from the direction that they're flexing. So if the soft tissue is contracted for any number of reasons, then it can affect that release on a regular ongoing basis, which can affect the wear patterns in the teeth.
So this is kind of what I was meaning when I was talking about the TMJ being a weird joint, because it's not just a straight hinge like we kind of think. There's more mobility in different directions than most other joints that I think people would think of when they think of a joint would have. You agree with that?
Yeah, I feel like, because I went to an anatomy course with Lori Moeller, who is an osteopath and she's a Masterson practitioner. And she, I'm sure, taught me exactly specifically what type of joint it is. Which, because there's like facet joints, right? And then there's hinge joints, and then but it like there's a meniscus, in between the T and the
Hmm.
temporal and the mandibular, in between the condyles. So like that can get pinched, and then um yeah, it's not just a flat, like I don't know if it's just a sliding joint or what that's actually called. I have to look it up.
Well, that's okay. That may be more technical. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I think when people think joint, they're thinking more like hinge, where it moves pretty one dimensionally, and the TMJ is not that. It moves weird ways, I guess. um,
Yeah,
and I,
I
I
mean
think
there
that's something
are.
we need to appreciate more than we do. And if I could just say this here too, with a lot of my bit work, I think one of the most misunderstood and most important things that we need to appreciate with a horse is that it is incredibly important that a horse's tongue is forward when we're riding them and that they can freely swallow while we're working them. And one of the most common problems that I see with horses and bit work is the rider has offended the horse's tongue and they get a tight jaw and they withdraw the tongue a little bit, which restricts the entire throat area and tends to inhibit or prohibit swallowing. And when they're not swallowing, this is just a snowball effect of building of tension in the horse. And I think that's directly related to what you're talking about with the jaw being able to move forward and be a little bit more relaxed. That gives us the room in the throat and everything, and aids and allows them to swallow more easily and remain tension free. And I don't think I've ever been in a conversation where I had as open a door to talk about that as you just gave me. So I have to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and like one of the things that I find is that if the horse is on a regular basis moving in a more vertical pattern through the TMJs rather than having a natural rotation, that because the jaw and the tongue work together when the horse is chewing, the jaw rotates one way and the tongue rotates the other way. And that's how they roll the forage into a bolus or the food into a bolus. Um, when the jaw is not moving in a consistent natural rotation, the tongue is not either. And so a lot of times those horses develop hyoid tension. Um, and that can really affect their training and riding and all the fascial connections through the body too, um, and through the pole for sure. So I imagine if the teeth aren't as ideal as they could be for the individual, that would really affect like how they're interacting with the bit and how they are able to relax the tongue and the hyoid during work or outside of work. Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the seal, and I have to be honest, I don't completely understand how that works, but I
You
am
want me
in,
to talk about it a little bit right
I'm
now?
kind of interested.
Okay, so the mouth seal is a pretty key thing for a horse to develop. One of the things that I try to teach and that I have found to be universally true with horses is if you hang the bit a little bit lower than most people tend to, and my general rule of thumb is I actually adjust it so that it's hanging from the headstall about a quarter of an inch below the corner of the mouth. And that's specifically for a snaffle. And what that will encourage is the horse to pick the bit up and suck on it and hold it with their tongue and their lips, and they actually hold the bit. Um, and when they do that, their lips will be able to relax. And when we think of the mouth seal, we tend to think of the lips in the front of the mouth. In the horse's case, that's actually only half of it. So if we go to the back of the throat, and you were talking about the hyoid apparatus. The hyoid apparatus looks almost like a little swing. It's kind of shaped like a Y. It hangs in between inside the horse's lower jaw. It attaches up toward the TMJ, and it has a really funny looking little bone that sticks right out the front of it, and the base of the tongue ties directly into that bone. And then most of the rest of the attachments to the hyoid are cartilage. So part of that is the epiglottis, which is in the back of the throat. The epiglottis is directly all cartilage tied to the hyoid apparatus. And in the top part of the back of the throat, we would have the soft palate. So when you swallow, what happens is the soft palate and the epiglottis come together and they form a seal. And that is what keeps the food or drink or whatever you're swallowing aimed at the esophagus and not going down your trachea into your lungs. In the horse's case, they are actually built a little differently than we are. They are what we call an obligate nose breather. So they are incapable of breathing in and out of their mouth. And so that means that in order for them to do exercise and be able to respirate, breathe in, breathe out, and reoxygenate themselves at maximum capacity, they have to constantly have the seal in the back of the throat formed as well. So the soft palate and the epiglottis where they come together. So like in human terms, this is where snoring comes from. Generally, when you're snoring, that means the back flap of the soft palate isn't as stiff as it needs to be, and it starts to vibrate and let air into the mouth chamber rather than staying in the nasal cavity. And for a horse, that is a much bigger problem than it is for a person. And so the mouth seal on a horse is both the lips in the front of the mouth and the soft palate and epiglottis in the rear of the mouth. And so if we have the jaw in a more anterior position, so like if we get a horse behind the pole and the jaw can't move forward and down like you're talking about, but it's crammed up toward the horse's pole, we also tend to have a defensive tongue reaction, and the hyoid apparatus has extra tension pulling the base of the tongue up toward the horse's pole, and we then interfere with the rear part of the mouth seal where the soft palate and the epiglottis are. So this can actually be one of the reasons where we get a foamy mouth, because the horse exhales, and rather than having that seal formed in the back, as it exhales, air actually gets into the mouth where it should not be. And now we've got one of the ways to incorporate air into saliva and whip up white foam. So does that?
Yeah. So, but it seems like that the really important piece for all of that to work how it's supposed to is for the horse to originally learn how to carry the bit.
100%. Yep.
And
so like you were talking about colt starting earlier. I use just a bit on a string when I'm starting colts, and as soon as they're gentle enough for me to put a bit on them, which, some of them come here halter broke and very gentle, and I can do it immediately. Some come here not halter broke at all, and that may take a little while before I could potentially get a bit on them. But as soon as I feel like I can put a bit in their mouth and slip something over their ears, I put that little snaffle in their mouth and I adjust it so that it's loose, like I just said. And then I start doing groundwork with them. And normally in about 5 to 10 minutes, they're comfortably packing the bit around, and they do that for the rest of their lives. So what I don't want to do is put a bit in a horse's mouth, adjust it so that there's 2 wrinkles, put some sidelines on him, and then run him around for 30 minutes. That is like the worst thing you could possibly do. And unfortunately, relatively
especially
common.
If you forget,
but if we can...
Especially if you forget to tighten your nose band, Daniel.
Yes, yes.
That would be
So that's
extra.
another, like the nose band. We're talking about mobility of the jaw and all of that stuff. I'm pretty adamantly against nose bands in any case because I want that jaw to be able to move as freely. It also robs us of a lot of the communication. I want to read that horse's body language. I want to see if the lips are pursed, if, whatever is going on there. And if I have a nose band on there, it is going to take some of that communication away from me. So my general rule of thumb of a nose band is to take it off and throw it in the top of the tallest tree you can find near the barn. That's pretty much how I treat them.
Yeah, so I feel like, what you're saying, all those things that the horse needs to learn, it can be very easy, if it's done right in the beginning. And if their teeth aren't too terribly interfered with. Especially, I think it's interesting how we start putting a bit on a lot of times when horses are like right at the peak teething time.
Mm-hmm.
Between about 2.5 to 4 is like really they have a lot of teeth coming and going in the mouth then, and just a lot of changes in development. So, I mean, I think it's kind of a hard time for them to be able to add more things and understand even more. But then if, you're starting them and you go and get that first float and everything gets smoothed out real nice and flat and smooth, and then all of a sudden they don't have enough contact where the teeth have only just started coming in and they're not really established yet, then that can create a lot of contraction in all the soft tissue through the tongue, through the hyoid, through the pole. So it can make all those things more difficult for them to learn and to stay relaxed while they're learning. And I like Spencer would talk a lot about just the nerve pathways and like, okay, what does that do to like the nervous system too? Like, how easy or difficult is it for the horse to come in and out of a more or less parasympathetic state or a sympathetic state? And if you have um, a lot of interference in the natural flow of the nerve pathways through the stomatognathic system and through the cranial area, like how is that affecting their ability to learn, or to relax or to participate with us?
Yeah. One of the current rabbit holes I'm trying to go down and I'm having a little trouble finding confirmation on is the main parasympathetic nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, runs right down through the hyoid apparatus, that whole complex. And then the hyoid also has 6 muscles, 3 pairs that come directly off of it down into the shoulders and the sternum. And when you have the main parasympathetic nerve running right through that complex and you introduce tension in the jaw and the tongue, which are all tied right to the hyoid, which has also got the parasympathetic nerve, vagus nerve running right through it, it seems like it's not a far stretch to say if we offend the mouth or the tongue, we are going to radiate tension right through the horse's whole body right there from the start. So
Yeah.
from my point of view, riding well really begins with not offending the tongue. If you offend the tongue, it's a shit show every step of the way thereafter. There's just no recovery from that.
Yeah, so, you know, yeah, how do you avoid offending the tongue then? Like, so that's more, I would imagine, like an educational process that you go through with the horse to help them understand how to respond when they're carrying a bit and what that actually means,
Mm-hmm.
but there are so many different ways that people can offend the tongue too. Like, sometimes people grab the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when people are floating horses, they grab the tongue and pull it over to the side. I'm like, whoa, that's fragile.
Yeah,
Like,
that scares the hell out of me. That
oh
that
my
would be a
God,
get in your truck
fragile.
and get off my property kind of moment if I saw somebody do that to one of my horses. We're done right now. Like no
Yeah.
second chances. You got to go. So
Yeah. And like when I work with them, if I can tell if they're really tight, like especially like on one side and some of that tissue that's around the hyoid and attached, but especially like on the bottom, if there's anything that I can do to release some of that tissue from the outside to release the hyoid before I start, like if it's really tight, it really helps them because when I need to go all the way in the back of the mouth and adjust like the lower 11s, if it's difficult for them to have me even touch them there, or if I need to move the tongue slightly to the side to create a space for my instrument and get like an accurate adjustment, like if they're really, really tight there, they will put their head up and get uncomfortable. So the body work can really help to relax them and release some of those connections before the dentistry also.
yeah, I think that's a fantastic combination of skills and tools that you have there, so that you can recognize some of those tension points and you have the skills and abilities to be able to help that horse release that. Because I would imagine once you get into, hypothetically speaking, if you were to get into sedation territory, that then is going to change your ability to see what may or may not be going on there and the horse's ability to give you feedback when you're working on it. I may be wrong about that. I guess it would depend on
Yeah, no,
hypothetically how you're doing that, but
yeah, I feel like you could come away from a session with a lot more information. And um if the horse is heavily sedated, then you might not get very much information at all from them. And if there's not a lot of evaluation previous to the dentistry, then we're pretty much more just floating teeth in a way that we think that they should be floated, rather than kind of looking at like, well, how is this working for the individual?
you we had in our kind of pre-conversation, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about some of the Vaquero stuff. And I think what you were just discussing with the ever changing mouth of a 2.5 to 4 year old horse, to me, one of the really cool things about the Vaquero world is the use of the hackamore on young horses. And I don't know, I don't get a lot into reading the historical stuff. I'm just kind of intuitively imagining, as practical as they were, it makes sense to me that they knew stuff was going on in the mouth, but we don't have x-rays. We don't, they have a reasonably limited knowledge of what may or may not be going on in the mouth at that point in time. So why not just avoid it? We'll just take some rawhide and we'll put this thing outside of the mouth, and I can still get him ridden, and I can teach him how to rope, and I can do all of that stuff. And then when he's 5 or 6 and all of these changes are done and he's finished with that stuff, then we'll slap a bit in his mouth and we'll go on about our lives. And I've already got him pretty educated, and we can then do what we want to do. So to me, it's a perfectly pragmatic and reasonable approach to things. And I think it's kind of elegant in its simplicity of, here's an area. I mean, you think of it like 1833, like we don't have, I'm imagining speculums and titanium tools and carbide tools and sedation drug. Like none of this stuff is an option at that point in time. And so isn't it a hell of a lot easier to just not mess with that until it's done doing what it's going to do? And we'll just put a noseband or a hackamore, bozal on, and go on about life. I think it's like one of my little funny factoids is back when the U.S. was in the space age and going to explore space and all, we spent something like $10 million developing a pen that would write in space, because you've got vacuum, no gravity, none of that going on. And so a regular ink pen wouldn't write in space. the Russians sent one with pencils. Like, why spend $10 million on the space pen when a pencil would suffice? It's a simpler, more elegant way of handling the problem without being wasteful or unnecessary, right?
Yeah, well, and I don't like I know very little, but from my understanding, and somebody, a woman recently on my trip that does start young horses, and she's been doing that for a long time. She was telling me that the snaffle was integrated, later on and as a first step, and that because that is primarily used to educate the horse to lateral flexion, that then the hackamore or the bossal is more for longitudinal flexion through the body. And like I think that's really cool if you can use the hackamore like maybe while the horse is going through all those changes. But I also think that the education to release the jaw on the pole to the lateral flexion um, is really a doorway to more parasympathetic states, and it opens the spinal column so that we can have that longitudinal flexion and develop
Yeah.
the hindquarters over time for the horse to engage the hindquarters. Um,
I, I
but
do find the hackamore to be a very useful and elegant tool. I do also think that it limits you in some areas that the snaffle allows you to do some things that the hackamore isn't as limited to, specifically with what you're talking about right there. So if you understand kind of the mobility of that jaw, and it isn't just a hinging object to you, and there's some lateral stuff and other weird things going on there, then the
okay,
snaffle gives you access to that the hackamore does not. And so I think that's an important distinction.
it's not a ball and socket joint though. I
No,
mean,
no.
they basically like slide against each other, but then there is like this it's
Yeah,
not a hinge, but then there is this opening motion that happens too. So it
yeah.
is interesting just to
It
think. Yeah.
yeah, it kind of moves a couple of different ways. It's not a
Not a
like a
normal facet joint. It's
yeah.
and yeah. But yeah.
So which kind of makes the whole mobility of jaw even more important, because if it can move multiple ways like that, that means that the soft tissue engagement of it is even that more important to its stability. And so if you jack that up, you're
Yeah.
more jacked up than normal, right?
I don't, yeah, I mean, maybe that just is why a little bit like if the teeth aren't supporting that joint, like in the back of the mouth, like I've seen young horses that take until they're 8 or 9 for the upper 11s and for the 11s to really establish consistent angles and crown that supports those joints. Like, so I think they're still developing there, like in the skull and in all that cranial tissue sometimes as late as that. I think that, yeah, maybe that is why, like when those angles aren't right or when they're overfloated and they don't have that support, that all the soft tissue just like contracts to stabilize everything. And that makes the whole area really tight.
Hmm. Yep. I have a horse. This is one of those things that'll be in the 7th module of the bit course that I've been working on. But this is actually my son's horse. And as he canters around, you can see his jaw muscles, the masticators, like flowing like a wave. And you don't see that very often. More often, you're going to see like the striations of tension of a very
Right.
well like
Like clenching. Yeah.
yeah. And this horse is
Oh,
so
that's
loose and
beautiful.
relaxed in his jaw that like his jowls are just flowing like it looks like Pamela Anderson running on the beach in a Baywatch
Oh my
commercial or
God.
something like that. And so we're going to get that on film, because that, like, what better illustration is there of a horse that is relaxed and comfortable with the bit than that? You know, like
Baywatch Masters. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to see them just relaxed and everything just kind of, yeah, flexing and floating. Sounds good.
yeah. So since we have broken out the dictionary of polysyllabic complicated words now,
Uh-oh.
do you want to get back into the equine adenoplastic resorption? And I didn't catch the last word of what that was. You want to expound on that now?
EOTRH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the H?
Hypercementosis.
Okay. So why
Yeah.
don't you tell us a little bit more about that now that we have.
Okay, well, I mean, I only know like what I know, like through what I've experienced and what I was taught in the school that I went to, and then through horses that I've worked with. So, um, in the school that I went to, we learned that EOTRH is caused by overfloating and power floating in the molars, to the extent that the horse no longer has healthy occlusion to share in the support of what we, learned is a 3-point balance between the TM joints, the molar arcades, and the incisors. And so the molars would be floated basically to lesser or no occlusion so that there is then more pressure on the front teeth.
So occlusion means what specifically?
Contact. So
Okay.
like
So
contact
they're like
between the
pillars that are
upper,
holding up part of the foundation of the
yeah, so
horse's
like
mouth. He can anchor
contact,
on.
yeah, between the upper and lower teeth. So like if you close your mouth in relaxation, but enough so that your teeth touch, you probably have a number of places, I would hope, or at least several, or at least more than a few, where your teeth make contact from top to bottom. And that helps to offer us proprioception, so like spatial awareness and balance and equilibrium and a number of other things. And it also stimulates some of the nerve pathways through the periodontal ligaments and through the cranial area. So anyways, like if they're overfloated in the molars and it puts more pressure on the front teeth, and additionally, the angles have been changed to be pretty flat from what is natural in the molar arcades, then the horse is gonna have more pressure on the incisors and also, in most cases, be chewing in a more vertical movement pattern than is normal. And the incisors, in a natural sense, are used for grazing and foraging, and there would be more of like a nipping action used there, or even sometimes like a lateral, like brushing movement, but like a nipping action. And so they would have some natural wear. Um, and then there would not be a lot more vertical pressure. So, like in this disease, what happens is there's more and more of this unnatural vertical pressure that goes up through the incisors and it creates inflammation. And the teeth can actually begin to hyper erupt. And there's a lot of bony like calcification, like inflamed tissue that happens through the ligaments and through the gum tissue as well. Um, and then the only thing that the veterinary industry offers as treatment is to extract the incisors. And so then if you extract all the incisors, you end up with a horse that basically has the tongue hanging out. And over time, that can create a lot of discomfort, I think, in other areas of the body, because of those attachments to the hyoid. So I've seen horses at all different stages of the disease, diagnosed and undiagnosed, but like more common in areas of the country where there is heavier power floating and or a lack of foraging or natural grazing or pasture. So like when like out in California or Arizona, those horses aren't out on grass for at least like half the year. In some parts of the country, these horses are out on pasture. Like when I go down to um like around like South Carolina, these horses are out like most of the year on pasture. So they have some natural wear in the front teeth. So that helps, to keep things in balance. But when I work out like in Arizona, just for example, it seems to me that this inflammation can get started a lot more rapidly because if the back teeth are power floated and they don't do anything with the front teeth, and then there's no natural wear either, pretty quickly you start to see some excess length there. And, then it doesn't help if they're also moving vertically rather than rotating. But you can, if you catch it early, you can adjust the incisors and reduce the length. And Spencer used to say to gap the incisors. I don't think I've ever actually done that or like succeeded at doing that, like actually creating a gap in the incisors. You'd have to adjust quite a bit of tooth, like to do that. But even just reducing the length and taking the pressure off of them and then allowing the molars to come back in. Sometimes I come back a year later and it's 6 months later, a year later, and it's like there never was any inflammation there and they're fine, And then there's like a huge gray area. So once it gets progressed enough, you can sort of sometimes make adjustments in the incisors to reduce pressure in certain areas, to slow down or pause the inflammation. But it's a lot harder to change depending on, how fast or how late in the process the horse is. And yeah, I don't know as much like from a veterinary perspective about the specifics of what they find to be true, but I have never seen a horse like I've worked with like several hundred cases that have had EOTRH, and I have never seen one that had never been power floated before. Although it's rare sometimes now within the industry to find a horse that's never been power floated. Um, and I think there are different other things like systemic things that might contribute to the onset or the progression of that. But that like at a fundamental level, I think it is very likely because we're kind of getting to the first generation of horses that has been power floated, sometimes every 6 months for their whole life, sometimes once a year for their whole lives, since they were 2 or 3 years old. We're starting to see more and more some of the results of that.
One of the parts of the lack of common competency in the equine dental world that really does scare me, I think this is a little bit comparable to the farrier world. So we've all had a bad trim put on a horse. The bad trim, however, grows out in a few weeks. And so its negative effects would be somewhat temporary. But if you overfloat the molars, that is not fixed in 6 weeks, right? That takes
Right.
significantly longer
So
to right itself. So
there are a couple different things there because the tooth is finite. It doesn't regenerate like the hoof capsule does. So some of these horses are running out of tooth in the molars when they're as young as like 14 and 15 years old.
God.
Yeah. And sometimes not as much, but I think that it's possible that they don't have to outlive their teeth, even though we're, you know, doing all sorts of nice things to protect them into their 30s sometimes. I think it's possible that if we keep things in balance, there never is enough imbalance where we have to take a lot of tooth out of the mouth. That could be that could offer them a lot more longevity. And in their bodies too, because when the molars come out of occlusion, there most often is some atrophy and contraction in the long muscles of the back and less proprioception and um, anyways, but the other aspect is that the stimulation of the molars, like when the horse has occlusion, the vibration, the natural vibration that goes up through those ligaments is part of the eruption process. So if they get overfloated to the point where the teeth are smooth and they no longer have contact and it's not this normal grind where they have a striking component that happens in the surface of the teeth as well. And instead of that, they're just chewing vertically, but there's no contact happening in the molar arcades. They can get stuck like that, where it takes a really long time for the teeth to come back in. And Spencer teaches that we can do vibrational therapy where you can actually like artificially from the outside stimulate some of that eruption. So you kind of like jumpstart the eruption in the molar arcades, and then you balance the front teeth, and then you can bring them back into contact in the back. But it's like interesting to see like, okay, well, what is that over time? How are the joints affected? And you have to be kind of careful because some horses, when they get like, and I might be getting way off here into a long tangent, but some horses when they've been power floated and they've been over floated in that way and they're used to moving in this more vertical way and they're just kind of like mashing their food and they don't have a lot of contact, and then they've also had power tools and they probably have pre-existing sagittal fractures up through some of the molars. When you start to restore that and bring the molars back into contact, and then all of a sudden you have this lateral grind happening, sometimes stuff breaks off too. So you have to be careful in making changes, and there's just like this huge gray area to what the horse is going to be comfortable with, because if they've been like that for several years, then the opportunity to make a significant change might be less or less appropriate.
So we talked a little bit about like horses that are stalled and they're getting hay twice a day versus horses that are out there 24/7 grazing. And I can imagine that would affect what you're talking about greatly, because they would chew less throughout the day, and so they've got less of this stimulation, less of keeping all of that stuff together. And also, I did want to get into the proprioception aspect. You touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to get a little deeper into that. But what if we have a horse that's, say, insulin resistant, and so we want to stimulate chewing for health, but at the same time, on the nutritional side of things, we have to be restrictive. Do you have any cases where you kind of had to find a balancing there, or maybe we played with a much lower quality hay so we could get some bulk but not necessarily increase caloric intake or anything, or what?
I think that's more just like on an individual basis. How do we manage horses because they're in our care and we've domesticated them, and so there are a number of different things to try to balance out that can be challenging. So like, how does it work best for the individual? And there's all different types of cool setups that people are doing now to to try to help those horses that are more sensitive. But I will say also that like the floating can affect the nutrition. Like it can affect how the horse breaks open and extracts nutrients from a stem of forage, and it can affect the saliva and how they produce the saliva and the balance of the enzymes in the saliva that gets rolled into the bolus. So I think either way, you want the teeth to be balanced. But like I have people that do muzzles, and it just depends on how the horse eats and what's comfortable for that individual, I think. Um, and there are a number of other things you could probably do, natural or clinical, to treat the insulin resistance as well.
What about, so you kind of opened this door there. So you hear some of these things. I'll see what your opinion of them is, but like, to know that your horse needs to be floated, you look at the manure, and if you start seeing fibers longer than a half an inch or something like that, that tells you he can't chew well anymore, so it's time to get the dentist out. Do you have any feelings on that?
It could be that they're not grinding the forage well. But you know, it's interesting, like sometimes how it can be difficult to help people understand that like their horse isn't grinding forage well, and it's not because of sharp points. It's because maybe they don't have contact, they don't have very much crown, they don't have very much occlusion, or the rotation isn't happening in a way that's sound, that's allowing them to break apart a stem of forage. So yeah, I think that's something that's a good thing to be aware of if they're not digesting their forage, like how is that first step in the digestion process happening? And it's not always fixed by just floating or just floating sharp points away, or like that's not always the solution.
So how are we to know how frequently we need to have this horse done? Is there a rule of thumb, or are you gonna go through that horse and then say, I probably should be back to see this one again in 6 months, or how does that work?
Well, I are you asking like when I work with horses, like how does that work for me, or
Yeah,
just
well, just the general, like is annually enough? Does it need to be twice a year? Every 5 years is good to go? What's
yeah.
the frequency we should be looking toward
So,
as owners, and how would we know what's
I
appropriate
mean,
there?
so I think it would be cool if, like, for some performance horses, if people were interested in having them looked at least every 6 months. And it just depends on like what that practitioner is able to understand and look at and adjust or not adjust. Because they tend to be, from what I've experienced, the majority of horses are actually a little bit overfloated rather than like not being done enough. But yeah, I mean, I think for horses that are like competing, and sometimes it's like a it's like a flare in the hoof. I kind of think about it like that. So if they're not, say they're not moving well through the shoulder or somewhere up higher, and so they develop this little flare, and then once the flare is there, it kind of blocks them from breaking over in that spot, and then you get the whole thing restricted, and you can trim away the flare, but if you don't release the shoulder, it's going to come back. It's kind of like that in the teeth. So they can develop excess enamel in an area if they're not wearing through that area on a regular basis. And then they need our help, or otherwise a change like in the way that they're moving. But otherwise a dentist. And then once the excess enamel is there, they can't really move through there. So, like with a performance horse, if they're trying to articulate specific movements and they then become difficult after, say, like 8 or 9 months or something, then you might kind of know, like, okay, well, we want to keep them on a tighter schedule. But that's pretty specific. Like, I feel like for a rider to be able to feel that change in their horse and then associate it with the teeth and be like, they stopped coming through in that right hind. So I think it's time for them to have their teeth done. I don't think a lot of people think of it like that. They're more just like, hey, my horse isn't chewing, they're dropping grain or something. But like I try to when I go the first time, sometimes initially, if I can get back to them, I like to go back at 6 or 9 months, depending on the horse and how young they are. And then once they come into balance, generally most of them can go closer to a year.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm envisioning this scenario with some of my customers where I call them and say, I'm having some trouble with the lead changes. I think we need to get the dentist out here. And then they look at me and go, are you stupid, son, or what? Like, are you on drugs? What's going on with you here?
Yeah, that's a
You have
real
to have,
thing.
yeah, you got
Like,
to have the right kind of customer to be able to say that to. And then,
like I have a friend that does horsemanship and works with people and horses, and he any way that he can, he will try to get it through to them because he knows, but it's like it's so cool that you would make some sort of association like that. And I think some people, they express that their horse felt really relaxed in the mouth or the pole, but to be able to say, yeah, like they're not articulating the movement anymore when I asked for this, specific thing in one of the hind legs, and like that's a little different. I feel like I have felt that a few times in a horse that I was able to balance and then ride like before and after, and it was just amazing. Like it was really cool to feel like I couldn't even so much put it into words, but just to feel like the freedom in the pelvis, and the way that horse could move in the lateral movement in the hindquarters. But yeah, it's it's just a little different for everyone. That I have some people that have older horses, and like when we balance their teeth, they'll stop quitting, and then like 8 or 9 months, I'll get a call and like, can you come back out? They started quitting again, and we try to just keep them good, but it's harder, starting later in the game. It's harder to keep that movement healthy.
well, Gretchen, I enjoyed that dentistry talk quite a bit, and I think we got into some pretty interesting stuff there. But you got more chops than just dentistry stuff. So why don't you talk about some of your body work practices? Masterson Method, obviously, you're an MMCP, and then you've also studied Reiki, and I'm pretty curious what Reiki on a horse looks like. So tell us a little bit about that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, well, the Masterson method, you got to go to Jim Masterson for the best information on that. But it has helped me immensely with my work with horses, like in the dentistry, and even with my own horse and with riding, just outside of the body work itself, because it has helped me be able to listen to them in ways that I previously was unaware of, and also to start observing, I think, more and more subtle things, and learn a little bit about feeling into, for me, feeling into like more subtle energy shifts in the horse as well, which isn't something that I have heard Jim really talk about. Like, it's not like we're doing energy work, but just when I first started learning it, I would look and watch for, the horse to blink or lick and chew or lower their head or whatever the different signs were that they were relaxing. And then over time, I started noticing that instead of watching to know when they were releasing, I would like feel the shift and feel the release and then see the external response that they were having. And so that practice started to really get me curious about all different sorts of things. But I did the Masterson Method first, and then I believe that at some point while I was going through my certification, I did some training for Reiki as well. And I haven't been doing as much of the Reiki in the last several years, and I have gotten more specific where most of the sessions that I'm doing now involve dentistry. And so I'm combining the body work with the dental work, and primarily I use the body work to help evaluate and help the horse relax and release tension before I adjust the teeth. And that can also help release the jaw into a more neutral position so that when I look at what the natural alignment is, it's at least a little bit closer, to where they want to be before adjusting the teeth. And yeah, so that's the Reiki is definitely a little bit more out there, like in the energy realms and in terms of practices that are a little bit more psychically opening, and like, I'm just going to say like harder to put words to, but basically, the Reiki classes that I went to, we got attunements to the Reiki energy. So then, you allow that energy to flow through your hands to the client or the animal or the person or whoever you're working with. So with horses, oftentimes I've found that if I open up kind of that channel or that space, that you do notice, that I'll notice similar signs that they're experiencing relaxation and release in the body. But it doesn't really look like anything crazy. I mean, when you do it with people, there are a series of hand positions that we learn. So you treat the whole body basically at once in a session. And then you can kind of break that up, if you're not strictly adhering to tradition. So like sometimes with horses, like if I just come to an area that is not moving well, or it's really tight or something, I might even do like an acupressure point, or I might just do a little bit of Reiki there. But it's more, for me, it was more opening in terms of like communication with the horses. And so when I'm just doing dental sessions and have to be really grounded and articulate in the present moment and kind of focused on that specific process, I haven't tended to incorporate it as much in most cases. Whereas the Masterson method, I use like every session because every single time, because it allows me to evaluate how the horse is moving and you know how they are balanced in the body that's affecting the jaw and the teeth.
So I've never, I gotta say, I've heard of Reiki. I've not ever experienced it, so I had no idea what that was gonna be. Do you find, like, is that more difficult to do if you have 3 copper coins in your left pocket, or you have to pee a little, it messes up the harmonic frequencies or anything, or it keeps you from being attuned there, or how does that work? Or
Well, Um, yeah, I mean, like when I travel a lot, like I'm a very sensitive person. So when I travel a lot and I'm seeing like a large number of people and horses every day for extended periods of time, then yeah, I kind of dial down that openness to feel everything. I don't know if that's kind of what you're asking, but
no.
there
Yeah,
are
I'm
like
kind of playing with you.
the Reiki classes that I went to. I mean, they do some of it you learn a little bit about crystals and stuff like that. So you can get pretty out there if you want to. And then you can carry rocks in your pocket and say that they mean certain things. And but I think that it, any of these practices are just if they're working for you or they're working for your horse, then like go for it. Because a lot of it is just I think a lot of it is just our consciousness and what we are projecting or not
Mhm.
and the clarity,
Well,
um
the placebo effect is real. I mean, if you believe something is going to work, it is going to change the way you deal with that animal. And even
yeah,
if the thing doesn't have any basis, you changing will. And so you will have, like, I kind of make fun of some of that stuff a little bit, but at the same time, I'm very science oriented. And in physics, we know that if you so much as look at an electron, you affect the electron. And
yeah,
so there is hard science behind some of this stuff.
yeah,
The energy thing, like the idea of me putting my hands up like a Jedi, right, and just changing this horse's force field or whatever. It seems a little bit weird. At the same time, I absolutely know I could get in a round pen with a colt, and if I've had 3 Mountain Dews and I'm mad at my wife, the odds of him jumping out of the round pen go up exponentially, right? Because my energy is way up here, and I really gonna have to consciously bring it down, or
yeah.
that colt's gonna be terrified of me, right? So
And
there's definitely is something there.
yeah, and like so I feel like the Masterson method work, I learned a little bit how to soften. And I thought that like my understanding of that word was definitely different. Um, and it has continued to change and evolve. But then when I worked a little bit with Mark Rashid, even having, you know, known him and Chrissy for a little while and having worked with some of their horses and observed and audited some of their clinics, what I thought I was understanding about that work, it was different than what I actually experienced. And so, like, on a very real level, what you're talking about, with the Mountain Dew and being like, that makes a huge difference. And there are all different levels of subtlety that we can perceive or not, or choose to perceive or not, or be open to, you know. And so, like, the Reiki, it's not like the practitioner is being like a vessel or a channel for the energy to come through. So the practitioner is not intending to like participate consciously in the process of as like, I'm gonna change this about this horse that I'm working with, right? They're just allowing the energy to come through them and go where it needs to go in the body. So we, learn over time, hopefully, to release some of our expectations and attachments, and allow that process to be as it is, I guess, if that kind of makes sense. But there is an actual attunement. So you can't, like, in that tradition, you can't just say like, oh yeah, I do Reiki now because I sit there and let the Reiki energy come, because there is a process that you go through using like symbols, and it's passed down through a lineage of becoming attuned to allow that energy to be transferred through you, to the client or the customer.
So you can't have like some hip hop in the barn radio playing while you're doing that. You got to kind of.
You could, I mean, you can do whatever you want. But like, I will say that being a very sensitive person, and I imagine that a lot of horses are far more sensitive than I am, that like if the practitioner is having a lot of conscious thought and a lot of logistical brain stuff going on, I don't enjoy that as much, because like I don't want to know all that stuff. Like, I just think that there's such this like transference, like we're all connected, and it goes through the horses too. So it's, that clarity is really valuable the more that we can get into that state. And like in the moment, like if I'm working with a horse and they need to put their head up, like it's just an interesting thing to think about, because if I have attachments to like, oh, they're doing that because of this, and this is so frustrating, then that makes the whole thing a lot more difficult, rather than just, okay, in this moment, all that's happening is the head's going up, my hand's following it, and then I soften. If hopefully I can do more like that, where then it doesn't become anything more than actually just what's happening in that present moment, but like being human too, like sometimes understanding from a more mental perspective can help me personally to offer a little bit more clarity, I think, to the horse. Like I had a horse that I was working with for a couple years, and he was always kind of difficult to work with for his teeth. And I try to keep learning to, be patient and soften my body, but it was challenging with that horse. And we learned after like the first 2 or 3 times I worked with him, that they finally did some veterinary diagnostics and found out that his withers were shattered. And so then it became, for me, different when I was working with him, because no matter how reactive or clampy or tight or uncomfortable he was, I was just like, oh, this is just, he has no way to avoid being like this. This is just a direct neural response, like and so there's nothing to become frustrated with, and I'm doing the best I can. So I just, like that. But just in terms of that clarity, like when you're doing the woo-woo stuff, like be careful what you do, man, because you could be like, like we don't really know what's best, right? Like we don't really know what we're affecting. Like, so that's not what it's about. And like when Jim teaches like the Masterson Method, is like, I love it because it's like you're not you're not doing, you're just bringing an awareness to it and relaxing, like, and then there's the movement and all these beautiful things that go along with it. But you're not like putting this like intention and focus on it where you're trying to like make a change. You're allowing the horse to participate at their own in their own place.
I think there's a key aspect of beauty right there. If as you talked about in the beginning, if you're aware of the horse, then the horse really starts to direct things based on the responses they're giving you and all. If you're listening, then the horse is really the one that's telling you where to go, how fast, how far, how hard, all of that stuff. You need that feedback, which is why take the noseband off your horse, tallest tree, fling like all the way up there. Otherwise, you can't read your damn horse, and it's kind of important. You got to know what's going on, man.
But also, like, just work on yourself, like, have self-awareness.
No more than 2 Mountain Dews.
Yeah. Yeah. 2.5 on a good day.
Are we talking 20 ounces here, 2 liters?
I
like,
mean,
what's
it's
my
all
limit?
how you deal with it, right? Everyone deals with those things differently. So some people can only have half a cup of coffee and they are going to be really uncomfortable in almost any circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Other people I know do not drink water ever, and they seem to be getting along okay like that. Whatever that means for them.
Yep. My wife is like that. She is actually getting out of this right now, but for years she lived on Diet Dr. Pepper. Only fluid,
Like,
maybe like taking a shower, a little bit of water to get in her mouth, but that was about it, right? Like it's Diet Dr. Pepper and nothing else. And how she's alive, I don't know. Like that's not good, but I drink 3 gallons of water in the summertime. I sweat so much I can't. I have to drink everybody 15 minutes, and here she is not ever drinking it at all. But anyway. Well, Gretchen, we talked a little bit about the TMJ, and I know you and I we finished the podcast, and we weren't particularly happy with how we had unpacked that. It was a little disorganized, and I know we both were looking for some words at one point. So we thought both of us thought it would be a good idea to come back and talk a little bit more about that joint. So when people think of a joint, a lot of times they're thinking of a strict hinge kind of a joint, and the TMJ kind of is that, but it also kind of isn't that. So given you have to manipulate this all the time in your work, why don't you tell us all about the TMJ?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited for this opportunity to follow up on it. I think there is a little bit of hinging action that happens when the horse opens their mouth. And then there's quite a bit of sliding in the joint. So I think just to have a little bit of very basic anatomy, there's the condyle that comes off the mandible and that articulates with the temporal bone. And there is like a little fossa, but that's not like what people call the temporal fossa, which is a much bigger hollow in the bone. And then within the joint space, there's also a disc that's almost kind of like a meniscus. And then there are a lot of soft tissue attachments stabilizing the whole thing. So when a horse chews, the jaw naturally would open and then drop down and a little bit forward in relationship to the skull, and then rotate in sort of an elliptical motion on one side in a rhythmical pattern, ideally, if it was happening in a pretty natural state. But a lot of horses don't always chew in that pattern if they are disrupted because of tension in the body or imbalances in the mouth, including the teeth. So I think there is a little bit of hinging when it opens, and then there's sliding in between the condyle and the temporal bone. And also the disc, I believe, can get pinched, and it can get sometimes a little bit out of alignment as well, depending on how the alignment is through the jaw and how the horse is moving over time.
So one thing I would like to point out here too. So we've got the mandible, which is the lower jaw, what we think of as the jaw. Then the maxilla is the kind of the top part of the skull that's going to hold the upper molars, and they're going to come together. And then the TMJ, where you're talking about the fossa and all that, is behind the eye. So that jaw goes back and up and ties in up toward where the ears are, and that's where this joint, the temporomandibular joint, resides. Inside of all of that is where the hyoid apparatus resides as well. One of the interesting things that I did, or morbid things that I've done, depending on your point of view, I had a friend with a horse that needed to be put down about a year ago, and I was doing the bit course at that time, and I wanted to get a hyoid apparatus where we could video that and kind of show what it looked like and how it tied in. And so we put the horse down, euthanized it, and then I did a dissection and harvested that from it. And I'm probably more familiar with the anatomy and everything in that area than most people would be. And I was still utterly shocked at how much time and how difficult it was to get into that joint and to separate all that out where I could get to the things that I needed to get to. It took me 45 minutes to separate the lower jaw and to harvest the hyoid out of there. And I broke one of the hyoid bones in the process of it, even though I was trying to be very careful. And I was really struck more with the complexity of attachment and also the fragility of the hyoid apparatus going through that process. Like I would have said I had a pretty good beat on what was going on. I learned so much in that dissection. It's not even funny. Like the appreciation I have for what's going on there now is the kind of thing 7 years of textbooks couldn't begin to give me.
Yeah.
Another part of this I think is pretty important. Like you mentioned a little bit, as a horse would graze, their jaw will slide downward. So like the lower jaw out opposite of parrot mouth, kind of an action
Forward.
as well.
Yeah.
And do you see much of that? Like we have discussions about feeding horses in buckets and hay up on the wall versus on the ground and things like that. Do you see issues there in your dental practice, or finding tension? You do the bodywork stuff as well. So have you found a strong correlation there?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, like, in an ideal state, the most natural version would be for the horse to be eating at varied levels, on the ground, and sometimes they forage up higher if they're out in the wild. And so if they're always eating in the same position, and I think we might have talked about this a little bit earlier in the conversation too, but if they're always eating in the same position, then they tend to chew in a very similar pattern, and that doesn't produce a balanced pattern of wear. So if they're from a high hay feeder all the time, then for horses that might develop ramping or hooks, like in the back and the lower 11s, that's not ideal, because the jaw isn't ever going to be very far forward to wear through some of that enamel that can come up behind the upper 11s, which are the last tooth in the mouth. And if they're always eating on the ground, that's a little bit more natural, but ideally there's some varied different levels. People do all sorts of things and get creative now with their hay bags and whatnot.
I really like talking about this. Is one of the things I try to really harp on with people is about horses that get behind the vertical and lateral flexion and what it really is and stuff. As it so happens, I was doing a bit consultation with a horse yesterday that was, um, it's one of these horses we don't know the history of, but it definitely had some kind of bad wreck at some time. I would suspect the nasal bones had been broken. Its lower part of the muzzle was a bit off in scarring and fascia. I'm assuming. I don't know X-ray wise what the bones and all would look like. I know they had done an X-ray, and there is actually a hole going from the nasal cavity through the hard palate into the mouth back where the molars are. And we kind of have a bony, horny protrusion through the skin where that was draining and stuff. So this horse had a lot of stuff going on, and something bad happened to it that harmed. I mean, it could have been a trailer wreck. I don't know. We don't have that information. But one of the things that they were having trouble with is that she would bend to the right, but not to the left, and seriously not to the left. And when I first started playing with her, I was doing that in a halter. I was waiting on to get the bridle and all of that stuff, and I would sit there and bend her in the halter, and she bent perfectly fine. Like if I were to put a little feed in my hand or something on the left side, she'd have no problem. So I knew the problem wasn't in her neck because that was as mobile as can be. So then I started grabbing the halter and really trying to move her and articulate her and get her to bend the way the bit might. And it turns out in her jaw, lower jaw, like we're talking about here, when a horse bends to the left, their jaw doesn't stay square like they might be when they're facing forward. Their jaw is going to shift a little bit, give room for everything that's inside there. Same when they're going to the right. So jaw mobility is a key aspect of lateral flexion and something we don't really get to talking about very often. It's also part of why we need the horse to swallow and lick and chew properly and keep the tongue free, because that means everything in there is mobile and is moving, and we don't have tension, clamping, all of the bad things. So like this mare, she could move her jaw correctly to the left, but not to the right. She was utterly frozen. So it's that elliptical pattern you were talking about. She had half of it, but she couldn't
Well,
go to the other side. So
yeah, and that's like more, the elliptical pattern happens when they chew. And then when we're asking like for lateral flexion, and we would call it disclusion. So when they're in relaxation and the teeth aren't necessarily occluded or in a firm, steady contact with each other from top to bottom. So they're just, they might have a little bit of contact, but there's like an energetic gap there, and the jaw's just in relaxation, but the mouth is closed when we're working with them. And then of course, hopefully they have the opportunity to release the jaw and move the jaw if they need to open the mouth or relax the tongue or, make an adjustment that way. But in that case, there's primarily just a little bit of sliding going on where when we ask the horse's neck to relax long and for the head to release so that we're releasing the pole dorsoventrally, or I guess what you might call vertically, not asking necessarily for vertical flexion, but just in that relaxed length, the jaw should slightly release forward. And then when we ask for lateral flexion and we ask them to tip, at CO1 and break at the pole, then the jaw should just drop away slightly in the opposite direction, like to the outside, basically. And it's really small. It's really small movements, but really small adjustments in the teeth, and especially in the incisors and the front teeth too, can make a very big difference in the horse's ability to articulate those movements in relaxation.
we might have touched on this, but I'm not sure that we got into it very much. But this also translates into proprioception for the horse. So the way the three pillars of the jaw, the TMJ, incisors, and then the molars, when they have good full contact there, their balance is secure. If they lack that, then they can start to act almost neurological, like their balance is compromised, and that can be um, a definite problem that goes on with horses. It's also part of why the lateral flexion is important, because if we are activating that twist mechanism where their ears aren't level anymore, our right ear dips down, going to the left or something like that, you're getting rid of that horse's ability to balance themselves very well. This is how we lay horses down. This is how movie stuntmen lay a horse down when it looks like they got shot out of the saddle and the horse goes down. That's what they do. And so I could not more strongly encourage you to stop bending your horse's neck around and making his nose touch your damn toe, because you're training him to fall down. That's what you're doing. You're training him to fall down. Stop it.
Like, it's interesting sometimes because I get people that ask me about doing carrot stretches, because that's something that they've been sort of taught or told to do with their horse. And like after a bodywork session, or after I do their teeth and we've sort of released the lateral flexion at the pole and through the jaw, I I ask them not to do the carrot stretches, because the horse is really going to get back on like the super freeway in terms of their established neural patterns for how they move. And if they have a habit of not releasing in the lateral flexion, and then they just move down and twist at C1-2, like you're saying, and they even sometimes have like hypermobility in the base of the neck or somewhere else, and they're compensating, then reinforcing that old pattern, if you ask for like a carrot stretch and they're going to come all the way around and use the whole neck, it can kind of undo sometimes some of the opportunity for new movement patterns that are actually correct and healthy. And that release in the lateral flexion at the pole is the key ingredient, whereas we don't need so much movement through the rest of the neck. It's gotten really overproduced, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. With the carrot stretches, I was going to ask you this: is that a temporary thing? Like, don't do that for 2 weeks, or don't do that ever again, or what is your deal there?
I think it kind of depends a little bit on the situation. That's not something that I personally would do with a horse that if I was working with them like on a more consistent basis. But I don't think it's bad in every case, because sometimes with older horses, movement is movement. And so if that's like the only thing that the person knows how to do and they really want to do that, it might help in some ways, to just keep things moving. But it's just different when we do with the Masterson method, especially because we're helping the horse find new movement patterns and relaxation. So they're basically having the opportunity to participate in a way where they're going to initiate some new neural pathways. So like that's not what a carrot stretch does. And it's just a little bit different, but I don't think they're bad in every case, I don't think it's an awful thing to do or anything.
So it would kind of be like if you went to the gym and you started working out and you did squats on your own for 3 years, and then you get a personal trainer that actually understands biomechanics, and they're like, oh, don't do that again. No. Okay, we take all the weight off, and now you have to learn how to actually perform a correct squat before we put load on you again, because you're going to hurt yourself doing it like that. That sort of a fair comparison, what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that is pretty similar. And but I also think that when you're talking about a carrot stretch, like you're that's kind of a similar movement to what you're saying to avoid when you take the horse's head all the way around to your toe or to your knee or to your stirrup or whatever. Like that's it's just a different thing, because you're kind of missing the value of the release of the pole in the jaw. That's what really opens up the spinal column and the hindquarters.
Yep, I agree. All right. Well, Gretchen, this has been a very enjoyable and enlightening podcast episode. I have liked some of the little twists and turns that we have taken here. I think I still have a lot of questions, which I personally appreciate, because how boring would life be if we ran to a point where we didn't have some questions, right? A good conversation is as stimulating of new questions as it is answering of old questions. So I certainly want to thank you for that, and for being gracious with your time today and having this long conversation with me, and also Minnie back there in her crate being quiet,
Usually,
not biting anyone or any, because these psycho chihuahuas.
hey, whoa.
No, I don't let me
Yeah.
put that bad energy out there. And the little wire hair thing too, like, she's a unique looking little dog. Like, yeah, you got a one of a kind there.
But yeah, I'm really thankful. It was fun talking with you, and I really appreciate your openness and your dedication to the horses too. So
Thank you.
yeah, let's talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, and we'll have, of course, as always, links to all of Gretchen's stuff in the show notes, and then we will also have a link to the Neuromuscular Dentistry website and school if any of y'all are interested in that, or finding other people that have graduated or whatever. I think you can tell there's a lot to this. It's not a simple thing, and maybe we shouldn't stick a power tool with a carbide bit in a horse's mouth and just go to grinding away on stuff without being a little more careful about that process. So thank you, Gretchen. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope you have a good afternoon.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.